Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From late-night booths that breathe to shadows that never leave the counter, get ready for 20 true, terrifying Texas diner encounters that will make you question what's real and what's sitting across from you when the neon starts to flicker. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because today's just the beginning, and the terror hiding in these diners is far from over. So where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the grill's still hot, the booths are never empty, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. Ask ChatGPT. It was just past midnight when I rolled into Fairgrove, Texas, the kind of town that seems to have forgotten time existed. The highway spat me out onto a stretch of cracked pavement, where the only beacon was the honeycomb diner's flickering neon sign, the yellow hexagon dimming in and out like a dying heartbeat. I'd been driving since dawn, chasing an indifferent deadline for a story nobody wanted, and my hands trembled on the wheel, not from fatigue but from that familiar itch of something waiting in the dark. I needed coffee more than I needed sleep, so I parked under a sagging street lamp and crossed the threshold into stale warmth and that comforting clatter of dishes inside. The diner was deserted except for one booth at the back, number 13. A gnarled wooden slab scarred by decades of elbows and spilled gravy. Seated there was the man, though he couldn't rightly be called that. He wore a stained denim jacket, the kind truckers favor, crusted with old grease and something darker I couldn't quite place. His shoulders slumped as if burdened by unseen chains, and he gazed at me with eyes so hollow I swore I saw the reflection of the neon sign in them, flickering not in the glass but in his pupils. I slid onto the bench opposite him, heart thudding like a jackhammer. The waitress, a skeleton of a woman with chalk-pale skin, glided over, her footsteps eerily silent. I ordered coffee and eggs, black coffee so bitter it tasted like regret, and she nodded once before disappearing into the back. The silence stretched, and I felt the man's gaze drilling holes into my skull. I tried to stare back to assert my presence, but found myself blinking first. When she returned, my coffee was a chipped mug half full, the eggs congealed into a sad gray mass. I lifted the mug, and he did too, holding an empty glass in a hand knotted with veins and stained the same greasy brown as his jacket. He never took a sip, he simply mimicked my motion, raising the glass to his lips and lowering it again, as if enacting a ritual whose rules I didn't understand. I cleared my throat. "Long night?" I said, voice rough, tasting of tobacco and exhaustion. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph. He slid it across the table without a word. I picked it up and saw a little girl, maybe 5 years old, standing beside a bright red bicycle. Her smile stretched wide, eyes shining like she knew secrets nobody else did. Behind her stood a man in overalls, face turned away from the camera. The sky was clear, but the edges of the photo were charred, as though someone had tried to burn it and only half succeeded. I looked up. He was still staring at me, that greasy sleeve brushing against the booth's threadbare upholstery. I didn't want to touch him. I wasn't sure he was fully there, a flesh and blood creature. It felt like staring at a stain on the world, something that should have been scrubbed clean decades ago. "Who is this?" I whispered. He tapped the photo with a finger so thin it looked like a blade. A droplet of black liquid let go and rolled into the crack between the seat and table. The waitress appeared at my shoulder and refilled my cup without asking. I watched as she did it, feeling a sweat-soaked chill crawl up my spine. She glanced at him, and for the first time I saw fear flicker in her eyes, quickly masked by that blank professional smile. I forced myself to ask, "Do you live around here?" He exhaled a breath that sounded like wind through dead leaves. "I'm waiting," he said, voice low, scraping against the diner's tin walls. "Waiting for what?" I pressed, though already I suspected the answer would be an echo of something terrible. He pointed at the window. Beyond the glass, I saw the highway stretching into black oblivion, the moon a pale coin in the sky. "People come," he said. "They order, they eat, and they vanish." My pulse spiked. I glanced at the empty booths, at the cracked formica tables, at the grease-streaked floor. Vanished? How? I asked, but my words sounded hollow. Swallowed by the diner's too long silence, he shrugged, shoulders rising and falling like he carried the weight of every lost soul who'd ever crossed that threshold. "They pay," he said. "Sometimes. Forget to pay. Sometimes they leave without saying goodbye. I stay late to settle the bill." I laughed, a weak, humorless sound. "You're the cook? Waiter? Night manager?" He smiled then, a slow curl of lips that revealed teeth blackened and chipped. "I'm the host," he said, sliding off the booth as if his bones were blocks of rotting wood. He stepped around the table, and I found myself standing, two heart-thundering, coffee mug trembling in my grip. His gaze drifted to the neon sign, flickering rapidly now, writing words I couldn't read. "Drink up," he said, and I realized my mug was full again, the coffee cold as ice water. I wanted to spill it, to smash it against the table, but I couldn't move. The waitress watched from the kitchen door, her hands pressed to her throat as if trying to swallow a scream. I took a sip. The taste was wrong, metallic, bloody. My vision swam and the diner's edges blurred. I saw footprints in the linoleum leading toward the back door, footprints that ended in a smear of black. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life on its own, playing a scratchy old country tune that warbled and slowed until the melody ground to a halt. Every bulb above me flickered, casting strobe-like shadows that danced across the room. By the time the lights stuttered back on, the man was gone. The booth was empty. The chair pushed neatly beneath the table, the photo vanished. The diner looked normal, too normal, like it had never known darkness. I ran to the door, yanking it open, and found myself back under the street lamp, the highway. Silent. The neon sign glowed lazy and steady, spelling out "open" in pale yellow. I turned back. Through the window, I saw the booth, and my blood froze. There on the table lay the photograph, edges smoldering softly, the little girl smiling at me with eyes that seemed to plead. I stumbled back, smashing my mug on the pavement. Coffee sloshed across my boots, hot and sticky, and I wrenched the photo up, staring into that sweet face. A crack split the photo from corner to corner, widening like a spider's web. The little girl blinked and her lips moved. In that moment I heard it, a whisper, soft as moth wings. "Come sit," it said. "The pie's still warm." I dropped the photo, turned, and sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys. The diner's neon welcomed me to stay again, its glow a silent invitation. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on gravel until the honeycomb diner was just a sliver of light in my rearview mirror. Some nights, I think I escaped. Other nights, when the road is quiet and the chisel moon hangs low, I swear I hear footsteps following me, soft, dragging, stained with old grease. And sometimes, when I stop for coffee at a different diner, I catch a flicker in the corner booth. A man with hollow eyes and a greasy jacket, just staring, waiting for someone to finish their drink. The moon hung low and swollen behind a sweep of black clouds as I rapped on the peeling door of old Maggie's house at the edge of Bitter Creek, Texas. The night was so still I could hear the cicadas cutting through the thick air like saws slicing into silence. Maggie swung the door open before I could knock again, her wild silver hair plastered to her skull by sweat or something wetter, her eyes glittering with a fever I didn't understand. "You're late," she croaked, her voice a rattlesnake's. Hiss. Inside, the lamplight flickered against walls crammed with dusty photographs, Maggie's past lives, frozen in sepia, smiling into cameras as if daring time to swallow them whole. She led me to her kitchen table, its surface scarred with gouges like the earth mended itself from some deep wound. And there it waited, a steaming pie, its crust so dark at the edges I swear I saw it pulse. As if alive, I'd known Maggie since. We were children when the creek ran clear and nobody whispered about the girl who talked to shadows in the woods. We drifted apart. Her family left town after her mother died, rumors swirling that Maggie's mother had been eaten by something none of us could name. Now Maggie beckoned me forward with a trembling hand, the blade of a carving knife catching. "The lamplight. Eat," she said, each syllable a broken prayer. I hesitated, the scent of burnt cinnamon and scorched apples curling around me like smoke from a funeral pyre. Still, something deep and unspoken in her gaze compelled me to obey, and I lifted the knife. The crust cracked under my blade, sending a little blackened flake drifting to the floor where it sizzled as if it had landed on fire. I scooped a forkful into my mouth, ash and iron and something that felt like fear. It was warm, but not comforting. It slithered down my throat, bitter and gritty, leaving a taste of memories I never had. And then I heard it, a soft scratching, furtive and relentless, coming from under the table. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Maggie laughed, a dry, broken sound that made the hairs on my neck stand to attention. "Do you hear it?" she asked, leaning in so close I could see the tremor in her lips. I nodded, but I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot. I lifted the crust again and cut another piece, more out of terror than hunger. That piece tasted of burnt hair, charred bone, and something wet and pulpy that set my teeth on edge. Under the table, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. A voice seeped through the floorboards, hollow and thin, begging for mercy. "Help!" "Me," it whispered, a single croak of despair that echoed in my skull. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Maggie tipped her head, eyes filled with something ancient and cruel. "She's still here," she told me. She never left. The photo on the wall across from me caught my eye. Maggie as a little girl, arms wrapped around a woman whose face was torn from the image, erased as if someone had gouged it out. My breath hitched. "Your mother," I whispered. "Maggie's." Grin split her face like a crack in a tombstone. The scratching became frantic, nails scraping wood so hard I thought the table would splinter. I glanced down, a pale hand so thin I saw every tendon slipped into view, trembling. The fingers clawed at the leg of Maggie's chair, trying to climb up to reach the light. The face that emerged was a horror I could never have imagined. Eyes sunken to black hollows, lips stretched beyond human limits in a silent scream, skin the color of death. It looked at me, and in that instant I felt an ice-cold dagger of empathy twist in my chest. Maggie's knife sang as she cut another slice, and she watched me eat it, her breathing ragged, her eyes bright with tears and something darker. Each bite I took seemed to coil around my soul, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to know, of broken promises, of rituals performed at the stroke of midnight, of blood and ash smeared into sacrament. I realized then that this pie was more than flour and fruit. It was made from the things nobody speaks of: grief, rage, unholy love. Under the table, the thing crawled. It creaked like old floorboards, pulling itself closer. Its voice was 1,000. Quiet prayers or curses, I couldn't tell which. "Mother," it moaned. "Mother." Maggie's hand shook as she lifted her fork, staring at me through a veil of madness and longing. She'd been trying to feed her mother back into the world, to keep her here, feeding her memories, feeding her fear. And I, her oldest friend, was the final ingredient. I dropped my fork and stumbled back, nausea flipping my stomach. But Maggie's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a grip of iron and bone. "Finish it," she hissed. "You must finish it." I felt the warmth of another piece of crust pressed against my lips. The whispers nodded in my head, luring me to obey. My mouth opened against my will and the pie slid down my throat once more, tasting of ash and regret and the rattling breath of the dead. The thing under the table stopped. Silence slammed into the room like a closing coffin lid. Maggie's eyes glimmered with triumph. "She's home," Maggie whispered. "She's safe now." But I knew better. As the last taste of ash faded, I felt something shift inside me, some fragment of my soul left behind on that knife's edge. The whispers faded, but I can still hear them sometimes at the edge of sleep, begging from beneath my own bed. Sometimes, at midnight, they call me back to Bitter Creek, and I know that pie still sits on that table, waiting for someone to set the knife to crust, to feed that hollow thing once more until nothing living is left to remember what mercy feels like. I pour my last cup of lukewarm sweat into a flimsy styrofoam cup and shove it into my jacket pocket, the way you tuck a live thing against your chest. The diner's lights hum and flicker like an argument in mid-curse. Outside, the wind drags. Tumbleweeds across the cracked asphalt, rattling the doors and rattling my nerves. I came here for a quick pit stop, somewhere off Highway 64 where the neon sign sputters "Mornin' Joe all-night service." They don't serve morning coffee at dawn, though. They serve ghosts. I slid into booth 7 at 2:15 in the morning, the clock's hands creeping like insects. The waitress arrived in a whisper of worn denim and a car that never made a sound if you even looked out the grimy window. She moved without weight, setting a steaming cup before me with a nod that might have been her entire face. Her hair was the color of old hay, sun-bleached and brittle, and it hung across eyes too pale to be alive. I tipped my hat back and met those eyes, trying to find a spark, and saw only reflection. "Thanks," I said, voice cracking. She didn't speak. She never spoke. She hovered between the stools, filling orders that nobody placed. A cup of chili for the man who read the paper, 2 hot cakes for the paper boy who never showed up. When I asked her name, the only answer was her lips pressing, shut as if she'd been taught a secret in a language no living soul could understand. Every time she leaned over the counter, I caught the faintest whiff of something acrid like metal left out in the rain. I finished my coffee in slow sips, each one burning the back of my throat, and watched steam curl upward in tremors. At 3 o'clock, a car pulled into the lot. Its headlights swept across cracked windows and dead vending machines, settling on booth 7. I half expected it to be of the living, but no one came inside. The waitress glided over, refilled her own cup, and stood beside me so close I felt her breath, cold as a tombstone. Outside, the road lay empty but for the wind's howl. My nerves had been stretched thin all night, thin as spider silk, and now I felt every fray. I told myself I'd wait until dawn. I needed to see what happened at dawn. I needed to see if she was human or a rumor strung from the highway itself. The diner clock ticked 5 minutes past 5. Windows beyond the counter bled in the first pale light. Birds somewhere out there, maybe. Just rats pretending began a hollow chorus. Through the window, I saw the horizon split open, orange like an ember. The dawn. The waitress stood up straight, porcelain skin reflecting that light as though she was carved from a gravestone. She reached for my paper cup, steam still rising, and turned it half around, offering it back to me. I stared, feeling. The air hardened around us. "Last one," she whispered without sound. Could have been a plea or a lullaby. I braced my hands on the table edge, nails digging into the formica like stakes. Then came the second when Dawn must have glanced at her and seen a crime. Her shape shivered, fractured into something too long and too still. She folded forward like a broken doll, hands slipping from the counter to the tabletop, and in that instant the diner grew deaf. No hum of fridge, no rattle of wind, no ticking of clock. They all froze. Her hair fell forward, hiding her face, and for a heartbeat I thought I heard crying. When I dared to look again, she was gone. The booth across from me sat empty, a perfect imprint in the seat where she'd been. The coffee cup trembled on the table, steam spiraling upward faster now, too urgent, too alive. I stand and leave a crumpled bill on the table, heart drumming, guilt in my chest. On the floor by booth 7, there's a single white hair, sun-bleached and brittle. I pocket it without thinking, fingers slick with fear. Outside, the dawn sun stretches across the highway, burning off the shadows like acid. I walk back to my car, tires crunching gravel, and glance once more at the diner's cracked glass. The sign sputters open 24 hours, though everyone knows it's barely open at all. I cough and start my engine, finger tight on the radio dial. Static, then silence, then a distant radio host saying it's sunrise in Estella, Texas county seat. Population 3,200 souls. She says local legend tells of a waitress who vanishes at dawn, returns only in darkness, serving coffee to the dead. She laughs it off as a joke told by truckers. I kill the radio. The styrofoam cup in my passenger seat rattles as though it's alive. When I pull onto Highway 64, the road unspools before me like a dark promise. I taste coffee on my breath and fear in my mouth. I hold that brittle hair between thumb and forefinger, and I swear the wind whispers behind me, begging me not to drive away. But I keep going because some stories refuse to end and some ghosts refuse to let you leave. The heat inside the old kitchen pressed against my skin like a living thing, humming in the stagnant air while the cicadas outside droned their endless requiem. I'd come upriver to this place to escape the city's roar and the ghosts that chased me through neon-lit streets, but it seemed I'd only traded one kind of terror for another. The farmhouse sat at the end of a half-forgotten county road, framed by twisted oaks in a sky so vast it made you feel small enough to vanish. I'd been alone here for 3 nights, sleeping in the spare room at the back, haunted by dreams of a little girl calling my name from somewhere in these walls. I'd blamed the dreams on exhaustion on the long drive across Texas, but in my gut, I knew there was more. That night, I found myself down here again, pouring coffee from the glass pot, listening for the soft click of the burner turning off, and wondering why the world beyond this room felt so distant. When I lifted the coffee pot to my lips, I saw them at once, tiny, glistening droplets of blood on the black handle, like pinpricks of some tiny crimson constellation. My heart clenched, and I dropped the pot so hard the burner spat and flared, burning my palm, and I staggered back, staring at the handle as if it might vanish, but it only shimmered, the droplets silent, wet, accusing. The kitchen was spotless, every surface wiped to a pale shine. Not a crumb on the counter, not a fingerprint on the cabinets. The floorboards, worn smooth, held no stain. Yet there, on that handle, someone or something had chosen to leave a message. I wrapped a towel around my hand and picked up the pot again, the droplets trembling with fresh life, as though they'd just been summoned. I hauled the pot outside onto the sagging porch and set it on the rail, half expecting the blood to drip onto the warped boards below, but it clung defiantly, refusing to yield. I stood on the porch, listening. The night was too still, but for the old wind chimes hanging by the door, which tinkled without a breeze. I pressed close. They were locked tight, the door itself bolted from the inside. I hadn't moved since before dusk. The chimes sounded again, brittle as bone. Inside, I heard the cabinet door creak. I raised my flashlight, the beam trembling as I swung it toward the dark. I could see the silhouette of the coffee pot, its handle still beaded with that living blood, but beyond that, the cabinets were closed, the shadows thick. My breath came harsh and fast. The Texas night felt close enough to choke me. I was certain I had to be, that no one else had been in this kitchen. I lived half an hour's drive away, and I'd locked myself in. At sunset. I'd heard no footsteps, no voices. So why this evidence of what? A visitor? A warning? Or a sign? My mind snagged on the little girl I dreamed of, the one who'd called for me. Her voice a raspy whisper, "Let me show you." That night, I'd woken to the sound of her laughter, echoing like a distant radio signal. Reason told me I was alone. But instinct, some deep, ancestral instinct, told me I was not. I stepped off the porch, flashlight in trembling hand, and edged back inside, my eyes fixed on the pot. The droplets shone even brighter now, fresh and unsettling. I asked aloud, "What do you want?" The silence that answered felt thick with malice. I reached for the handle, each step a nail driven deeper into my skull, but before my fingers closed around it, the chimes on the porch shattered, clattering out a discordant note, and the cabinets behind me slammed open with a crash that rattled. The windows. I spun, fumbling the flashlight, its beam dancing crazily over the room, illuminating nothing but walls of empty white. The cabinets were bare. Whoever or whatever had left the blood had taken its leave. I stood in the epicenter of my own panic, clutching at the lamp, sweat slick on my brow, the coffee pot abandoned on the rail outside. I forced myself to find the keys on the counter, a rusted ring of them, and I tried the lock on the back door, twisted it, but the bolt would not budge. It was locked from the inside. My heart thundered. I saw then that the coffee pot was gone from the rail. I stumbled forward, slammed into the door, rattled the bolt. Outside, the porch light flickered, and beneath it, the pot sat on the ground. The dark red droplets scattered across its handle now mingled with the coarse grain of the wood. And standing behind it, small, pale, eyes black as oil, little girl in a faded sundress, barefoot on the splintered boards. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Drink?" She whispered, voice like dry leaves. I screamed, a raw sound that startled even me, and bolted for the opposite wall, fumbling for anything to defend myself. My hand found a cast-iron skillet. I swung, the weight dragging my arm with a force, but I missed, the girl dissolving into shadow, the room yawning into emptiness. The skillet clanged against the wall, echoing. And then I saw it, the door that had been locked, now swinging. Inward, long and slow, revealing a dark corridor lined with cracked linoleum tiles. At the far end, the light burned dim, and there, the little girl stood again, backlit by some distant glow. She raised a hand, palm out, beckoning me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my bones, that whatever lived here would never let me leave. I turned back to the kitchen. The coffee pot had followed me inside, resting on the counter, handle to me, gleaming. New droplets of blood wove across the black plastic as though fresh from a wound. The walls pulsed with the sound of distant, pounding footsteps? No, a heartbeat, slow and heavy, as if the house itself were alive. I backed away. The skillet dropped, clattering to the floor, and the shimmering outline of the girl flickered at the threshold of the corridor, her smile widening until it stretched impossibly across her face. "Stay," she said, and the lights went out. I couldn't recall the drive over, couldn't remember fleeing down that lonely road, but when I awoke, I was in the passenger seat of my truck. Engine idling, headlights on, illuminating the porch rail where the coffee pot sat. I'd been gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles bled. The droplets were gone from the handle, but the pot was warm as if pulled fresh from the burner. I stared at it, heart pounding, and the little girl's whisper echoed in my mind. Drink? I opened the door, and the Texas night swallowed me whole. I came in before dawn when the neon sign outside still buzzed like a half-forgotten prayer and the parking lot was empty except for one dusty Chevy Malibu. The bell on the door tinkled as I pushed it open and a drenching stillness wrapped itself around me. I flicked on the overhead lights and the diner came alive in a wash of harsh white. The Formica counter gleamed, chrome edges flashing like blades. And behind it, I set out the syrup bottles and stacked plates with the careful ritual of someone who'd done this 1,000 mornings. I barely noticed him at first, the man in the corner seat, hunched over a table that should have been empty as the rest of the place. He wore a pale gray suit that didn't belong in West Texas, a threadbare fedora pulled low over his eyes. His skin was too smooth, too unlined, like the wax mannequin in that carnival funhouse down the road. I nodded and slid behind the counter. "Morning," I said, voice rough from too much coffee and too many silent hours. No answer. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the chrome behind me, on my reflection. But the way he stared made my reflection wobble as if seen through a pool of oil. "Coffee?" I asked, cupping a mug and reaching for the pot. He didn't move. His ice-cold cola sat untasted at his elbow, droplets of condensation gleaming like tears frozen in time. I filled a cup black as usual and set it in front of where he'd been. The seat sank a fraction, as if he'd shifted away, though when I glanced up he was still there, unmoving. I caught his eye at last, and the world went blind for a heartbeat. His pupils were too dark, too vast, swallowing the pale color of his irises. I tried not to flinch. "I'll get you something to eat," I said, but my voice sounded tinny in my own ears, as though I were speaking through a radio static. He stayed silent. I cleared my throat. "I got eggs." I peered at my watch. 5:03 a.m., though it felt like midnight. Under fluorescent lights. The diner's shadows felt too thick. He turned then, finally, looking past me to the window where the first rasp of morning was brushing the sky. He lifted the glass of cola and sipped without moving his lips. A faint click, like a latch releasing, and the small bell over the door jingled again, though no one entered. I whipped around, hands trembling, but the doorway was empty. When I turned back, the man's reflection in the chrome hood of the coffee machine was grinning. I wasn't. I hiked my shirt sleeve up and glanced at my forearm. Pale, unblemished, except for a wet streak of liquid trailing down to my wrist. No smoke, no steam. When I sniffed it, I smelled metal. Blood? I flexed my hand. Nothing. The diner. Lights hummed. Outside, traffic should have started by now on the highway, big rigs and pickups rattling toward Amarillo, but the parking lot stayed silent. I reached for his cola just to confirm it was real, and the glass slipped through my fingers, shattering on the tile floor. The shards skittered, bounced, and then clattered to rest without a sound. No echo. I stared. When I glanced at him, he was standing now, smooth motion, body length I could see beyond the countertop's edge. His reflection in the chrome strip. Under the sneeze guard stretched out, too long by half, limbs bending at angles no human should. "Hey!" I stepped back, hard a hammer, and landed against a stool. It spun and clanged into the booth. I blinked, and he was sitting again as if nothing had happened, as if the stool had never moved. I flipped the register open by force, found the emergency key, and locked the front door. That was stupid. I knew, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely manage. The key turned with a snap that sounded like a rifle shot in the dead air. Outside, dawn bled pink and gray across the sky. In the window's reflection, I saw a second man slip behind. Me, indistinct as a mist, and then vanish. I sank onto a stool, forehead pressed to the cool formica. He watched me, still as stone. I dared to look at his table. The iced cola was gone, replaced by a steaming cup of coffee. Cream swirled in the black liquid like a galaxy collapsing in on itself. I didn't remember making it. "Why are you here?" I whispered. My voice cracked. The muscles in his neck twitched once, like a heartbeat I could almost hear. Then he placed a hand on the table. Pale fingers, long nails, and right in the center of his palm, a dot of fresh red that pulsed softly. He didn't flinch when he touched the coffee. Instead, the red drop spread into the dark brew like an ink blot. I should have screamed, but my throat seized. I rose, straightened my shirt, and walked around the counter, each step heavy with dread. His eyes stayed on mine, unsettlingly calm. I reached the table. "You ordered nothing," I said, voice a whisper. He lifted the mug of coffee to his lips and took a sip. He sat back, and the wrinkles in his suit seemed to deepen, the fabric stretching as though something underneath was growing. His fedora flopped into his lap, revealing a scalp untextured, shining like an egg. For a moment, he looked hungry. I stumbled back. Plates clinked as I grabbed a knife from the rack, blade trembling. The diner lights flickered, and I shouted, "What are you?" The blade felt absurd in my hand. He only smiled, slow and easy, the kind of smile that knows the punchline before the joke is told. Behind him, in the reflection, the diner shifted. The booths lengthened, the countertop melded into pillars of chrome, and the checkered floor tiles swirled into a spiral. When I looked up, the man was gone. The mug remained, a ring of brown stain on the formica. My knife dropped with a clatter. That bounced off walls too far away to exist and lay in a crooked line of shadow. Silence flooded the room. I heard my pulse kicking in my ears as heavy as a freight train. I edged forward. The coffee cup rattled in place, though no breeze blew. My reflection in the chrome hood was unsteady, limbs blurred. I reached out and touched the steel. It was ice cold. I flicked a bead of condensation off and tasted it, metal, bitterness, and a flash of something dark behind my eyelids. The door jingled. I spun around, knife raised, but no one entered. The glass door swung on its own, settling with a dull thunk. I crossed the room, each footstep echoing unnaturally, so loud in my skull I thought it would crack. I jammed the emergency key in the lock, but the cylinder shattered in my hand. I ran back to the counter, chest burning. In the rearview mirror of the jukebox, I saw him, the man who ordered nothing, standing behind me. He looked older now, face carved into 100 lifetimes of sorrow, eyes like twin voids. And behind him, the walls bled shadows that climbed like living things. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. He pointed a long, slender finger at me and smiled. The bruised black veins in his hand pulsed. At that moment, the ceiling light snapped off, plunging me into darkness so complete I tasted it. And then there was a click, and every light came on in reverse shadows glowing. Highlights black dot in that inverted light. He was close, so close I could see the lines etched beneath his skin. The fine hairs on his wrist, the single drop of blood coalescing at his nail. His smile widened, and he whispered something I could not hear, but felt deep in my bones. A promise and a threat all at once. Then he vanished. The light steadied. The door was locked, and the coffee cup once more sat empty on the table. The brown ring gone, nothing but a cold steel surface and the echo of his absence. I flicked the lights off, let the neon sign outside breathe its red glow across the diner, and walked into the parking lot. The Chevy Malibu was gone. In its place was a smear of wet pavement, like a handprint that had been wiped away but not erased. I felt it under my fingertips, sticky and cold, and I tasted rust on my tongue. No one ever came in. The doors stayed locked until the noon crowd, and when they arrived, they found me alone at the counter, eyes dark and hollow, cold cola untouched beside me. I ordered nothing. Anyone who sat across from me saw the reflection shift in the chrome. Behind, watched as I raised a trembling hand and knew without a word that they should never come back after dark. I remember pulling into that lonely stretch of highway just past Brownwood, the neon of the Pecan Ridge Diner flickering like a wounded firefly in the night. It was 3:15 when I slid into the vinyl booth, the cracked Formica table, stained with coffee rings and abandoned hopes. The cook, a squat man in a stained white apron, nodded without looking up, and my waitress, thin as a prayer and twice as pale, sat a mug of coffee so dark I could see my own reflection drowning in it. Outside, the wind carried the hollow sound of tumbleweeds scraping the asphalt. Inside, the clock ticked with a deliberate weight. I was the only soul in the place, and it felt as though the walls were holding their breath. I suppose I ordered eggs, bacon, toast, the usual at this hour, and sipped that bitter coffee, feeling the ache of midnight miles push through my bones. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed like a swarm of mutated insects, and I watched the waitress's eyes flick to the door, then back to me, as if she expected someone or something to walk in any second. But nothing came. Outside, the highway stretched empty, yawning into the darkness. Inside, I was alone, and the freedom of that truth stung more than the cold air bleeding in around the door. My breakfast arrived in a single, perfect plate, steam curling like ghostly fingers from the bacon. I thanked the waitress. She leaned close, voice low. "We have a special tonight." I shook my head, smiled politely. I had places to be, miles to climb. She touched the edge of the plate, and I noticed then that her fingers left a smear of mud-no dried blood on the rim. She pulled back too fast, and her smile trembled. 17 plates, she whispered, then retreated into the back without another word. I frowned. I was one diner, one order. The cook slapped his spatula down and grunted. The lights overhead hummed louder, throbbing, and for a moment the coffee in my mug rippled as though a pebble had fallen in. I looked around. Nothing. I shrugged and ate, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching. When I finished, I pushed the plate away. The waitress reappeared with another identical to the first, as though the bacon and eggs had multiplied behind my back. I blinked. "I'm done," I said softly. She placed it in front of me anyway, hips stiff. I stood, paid the $1.35 on the counter, and reached for the door. That's when I noticed it. A third plate at my table. Oats and gravy, sleek sausages lined like polished pebbles. And then a fourth, a fifth, each more elaborate. More copious than the last, until I counted 8 plates in the flickering light, all steaming, all waiting. I backed away, and the cook's spatula rose like a specter from the grill. The waitress watched with hollow eyes, and then she set another plate in front of an empty chair across from me. I took a step back. My foot slipped on the spilled coffee. Grounds, and I caught myself against the counter. "Nobody ordered that," I stammered. The waitress tilted her head. "They did." I stared. She pointed at the back room door, its frame dripping with shadow. 17 total. The cook laughed, then a wet, throaty sound that echoed through the empty booths. I heard the spatula hit metal over and over, like a heartbeat. I grabbed my coffee mug, swung it like a weapon, and shattered it against the tile floor. The diner went silent. Broken glass glittered like a spilled constellation. I ran for the exit. The question screaming in my mind drowned out the hum of the neon sign as I burst into the parking lot. The Texas plain lay quiet, save for that restless wind and the distant buzz of the highway. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Until I was 10 miles down the road, headlights cutting slices through the darkness. My engine's heat rose around me like a living thing. Only then did I glance at the passenger seat, and there sat a brown paper bag, damp at the bottom, heavy enough to shift as I braked. Adrenaline curled down my spine. I parked under a paltry highway lamp and peered inside. 17 plates, stacked perfectly, steam rising in little spirals even though outside the temperature had dropped to a chill that would kill a grown man in minutes. My hand shook as I lifted the top plate. 2 sunny-side eggs, bacon so crisp it whispered, toast that still smelled of butter and something coppery. I dropped it. The plate hit the pavement, cracked, and the meal unfurled like a blood-stained flower. I backed away, heart hammering, and a sound rose from the bag like a soft, hungry side. I fled again, boots pounding against cold concrete as I jumped back into the cab. My phone slipped from my pocket, clattering under the seat. I scrambled for it, eyes wild. Something tapped at the window, no, pounded. My view was crowded by a dark shapes, arms, smoke. The street lamp glimmered in steel eyes, and I screamed. As I slammed the door shut, the engine caught and I peeled away, tires screeching, breathing ragged, on the road. I swerved around the curve near Old Mill Creek. The ancient water wheel stood still, silent, as though the night itself had stilled time. I passed a cadaverous billboard advertising cold drinks, but the woman's lips were smeared with something dark and gleaming. I shook my head, racing against the pounding in my ears. Finally, at the next town, Wilson's Crossroads, I found the police station, lights blazing. I banged on the door, voice cracking. An old deputy opened it, expression shifting from curiosity to alarm as he saw the terror on my face. I told him about the diner, the plates, the bag in my truck. He frowned, flicked on the overhead light. In the foyer behind him, the station's bulletin board bore old clippings. Missing persons, strange disappearances around that stretch of highway. 17 bullets on the board where people had vanished: hitchhikers, late shift workers, an entire church youth group. None of them ever seen again. None of their families given closure. 17 souls, and every local knew the tale but dared not speak it aloud. The deputy's radio crackled. "Got a runner," he said, voice steadying. Plate smashed on main and spring. No ID, just a spill. He turned to me. "We got a body in your pickup?" I watched his eyes go wide. "Better come on inside, son." Inside, they filed the report, took my statement. They dusted for prints. I stuttered through the questions. At dawn, I was released shivering, hollow-eyed, holding a cup of bad coffee in the station's cramped kitchen. The deputy slid an evidence bag across the counter. A small shard of porcelain splintered against the pavement. On it, smeared in crusted red, was a number, 17. I never went back for my truck. The bail bondsman warned me it had been towed to an impound yard outside town next to a row of broken-down rigs that never got claimed. I didn't care. I never wanted to see it again. The diner? The Pecan Ridge? It stands still, neon lurking in the scrub, waiting for the next lone traveler. Sometimes at night, when the wind carries the scent of frying bacon, I swear I hear 17. Meals being placed across a table, plates clinking in the dark. 17 empty booths. 17 hungry ghosts with nowhere to go and a bill that will never be paid. I never believed the stories about the old Highway 59 diner until the night. I locked myself in that grimy bathroom stall and heard my own name crackling over the jukebox's speaker. It was past midnight, and the greasy neon sign outside flickered, like a dying eye casting thin slashes of pink light through the frosted window. I'd been working the late shift as a fill-in DJ for KTRX, the little AM station that blasted its signal over half the county. Tonight, they'd sent me halfway, across town to cover a charity auction at the Diner. Cheap publicity, really. The place smelled of burnt coffee, spilled grease, and something fouler that slid under your boots and refused to scrub off. I stepped into the bathroom, tugging down my jeans, and nearly chuckled at the serviceable metal stall, practical, utilitarian. Exactly what you'd expect in a joint that stayed open until the sun poked its head over the pines. I stared at the scrawl on the drywall. Be nice OR leave. Beneath it, someone had scratched DJ Blake, you're next. I'd laughed it off. Someone's idea of a joke, I thought. Maybe a drunk who recognized me from the airwaves wanted a shout-out. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I dropped into a stall, locked the door, and reached for my phone, texting the station a quick update. When the jukebox crackled somewhere behind the sinks. First, there was static, like a migraine in sound, and then the tinny voice came over the PA. Hey, it's DJ Blake back at the mic. You looking for your 15 minutes of fame? It was exactly my voice, my cadence, my drawl, even the little sigh I slipped in at the end of the line. My pulse pounded so hard I thought I'd rupture an artery. I stood there, pants around my calves, and listened as the voice dragged out my name. Blake. You think you can just cruise in here, turn the tables, yank the plug on the station, and get away with it? My station hadn't mentioned any last-minute sabotage. I'd signed off the board 30 minutes ago, handed off to the morning crew, and driven over. I pressed my ear against the stall wall, expecting to hear some poor sap messing with the wires. But the bathroom remained silent, save for a distant drip of a leaky faucet. Come on out, Blake, the voice said, softer now, almost conspiratorial. Stop hiding behind that door. I want to see how scared you really are. The lights overhead buzzed, and I thought I caught a flicker in the mirror above the sinks. A shape shifting in the glass, longer than a man's silhouette, chest jutting. Forward like ribs had swollen beneath its skin. My breath wrenched in my chest. I held my phone torch up to the gap at the bottom of the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of a prankster's shoes. Nothing. No feet, no shadow. The hallway lamp outside the room pulsed in time with my heartbeat, and then stilled, leaving the corridor draped in darkness so heavy it seemed to sink into your skull. I unlatched the door and stepped into the aisle, every sense stretched taut. The diner itself was deserted, no cooks banging pans, no waitress swaying by the counter. Even the jukebox was gone, as if it had never existed. The stools at the counter sat in a neat row like obedient children, but the whole place felt wrong. My reflection in the stainless steel grill cover ahead of me looked pale, eyes rimmed red. I called out, "Hello?" But only the hum of the refrigerator answered. I made for the front door, but the bell above it didn't jingle. It remained, shut tight, pressing back against me like a brick wall. I tugged at it. It wouldn't budge. Then the DJ's voice slithered through the speakers above the booths, clear as day. You gotta accept the gig, Blake, or I'll take it myself. And I realized with ice in my veins that it wasn't on the jukebox. It was coming from the star-shaped grill on the ceiling, the diner's ancient PA system. I crouched between two vinyl booths, clutching my phone like a lifeline, my legs trembling so badly I thought I might collapse. The voice counted down behind me in that perfect, mocking drawl. 3, 2. And I dove for the exit sign, hitting my head on the door frame as I scrambled outside. The parking lot lay empty under the moon's sickly glow, each oil stain on the asphalt bleeding black. My keys refused to unlock the car, as if some invisible hand had turned the lock. The sky wheezed with clouds drifting over the street lamp, and then the PA crackled one last time. One? Welcome to your show, Blake. Behind me, footsteps. Not a dozen drunken stumbles, but a single deliberate footstep. I whipped around, phone light skimming across the asphalt, and saw him. Or her, or it. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing in the doorway, face hidden by shadows. It wore the station's logo on a dark jacket KTRX, a look-alike version of my own jacket. I strained to see its face. There was nothing there but a smooth, blank surface, like polished obsidian. I ran. My shoes squeaked on the pavement, lungs
burning, and I didn't look back.
The world swayed like an old projector skipping frames. When I reached my house, I fumbled my keys at the door, slammed it shut, and collapsed against it, panting. I called the morning shift to hang up a warning there. Was some sick prank going on at the diner? They laughed. They said late-night staff had reported strange PA announcements, but no one ever heard a voice call their name. Probably a glitch in the system, they said. Probably an uneven wiring job, punks sending you a scare. I tried to shrug it off, but when I slipped into the booth at the station that afternoon, I found the console already tuned to Highway 59 Diner. The PA line was live. My hand hovered over the fader, dread coiling in my gut. Then the voice came through, calm and measured. Welcome back, Blake. We missed you. And as I stared at the empty booth in the studio mirror where I should have been sitting, I whispered, "Who the hell is this?" It paused, then sighed in that familiar drawl, softer than a dying wish. "You are." I never managed to hang up the mic. The switch bent under my fingers. And ever since, when listeners call in, they say they hear me in the background, welcoming them, urging them to stay tuned. But there's nothing else on the air. Just my voice inviting the next soul to take my place. The night shift at Rosie's Diner had always felt like walking a tightrope over an empty canyon. But on the Friday the pie case first betrayed its secret, it felt like staring into the yawning mouth of something hungry. I'd finished wiping down the chrome countertop and was stacking clean cups behind the register when I noticed the glimmer like wet trails along the edge of the glass display. At first I thought it was syrup or maybe a smear of grease from the grill, but when I flipped on the case lights a second later, everything gleamed spotless. The cherry pie was as red as ever. The coconut gleam on the cream pies was untouched, and not a single fingerprint marred the glass. I shrugged and kept working, convinced my eyes were playing tricks after 16 hours on my feet. But then it happened again an hour later, during the lull between the night truckers and the college kids making their third run for coffee. I glanced down at the case and froze. Under the harsh fluorescent glow, there was a cluster of greasy smudges, as if someone had pressed their fingers from the inside out. They were too small for my hands and spaced unevenly, like long, slender digits reaching for freedom. I flicked the switch off and on, fully expecting them to vanish, and of course they did. No smear, no clue, nothing except a chill whisper at the back of my neck that said I was alone. I wiped the glass again, using extra elbow grease this time, and watched the reflection of the empty dining room behind me. The vinyl booth stood silent. The neon sign outside buzzed its electric lullaby, and the coffee urn on the side counter gurgled gently as if straining against some unseen pressure. I told myself it was condensation, a leftover patch from when the assy had kicked in, and if I got a fresh rag it would wipe clean. But in the greasy glow of my flashlight, my secret weapon when the strip lights flickered, I saw them. Deep, claw-like grooves beneath the glass, as if something had tried to scratch its way out of that gelatinous barrier. They trailed across the surface, weaving around the pies and stopping abruptly at the corner as though whoever made them had been yanked back inside. When the regular crew showed up at 7, I played it cool. I told Jenna, who ran the register until dawn, that I must have leaned against the case too hard. She laughed and tossed me a coffee cup without asking questions, and for a moment I almost believed it until I caught her eye in the window reflection and saw the way her smile faltered. She knew it too. Deep down she knew. The next night I came in early and left the lights off, hoping that whatever it was would stay quiet until daylight. I inspected the case with my phone's flashlight, leaning in close until the stale breath of last night's fries tickled my nose. The glass was etched with tiny fingerprints again, wet, glossy ridges that looped and arced in grotesque imitation of human touch. This time, I ignored the switch and kept the light low, letting the shadows swallow the prints. I pressed my palm against the cool exterior, imagining my skin seeping through, but nothing happened. No suction, no shift, just my heart hammering in the tight cage of my ribs. I stood there so long that the diner seemed to hold its breath with me, the hum of the refrigerator in the back room dropping to a meek whine as if afraid to betray the secret. I tried to catch the next shift worker's eye, the dishwasher, old Terry, who always had bloodshot eyes like he'd seen too many things in the dark. But he just nodded in greeting and nudged the grease-stained grill brush across the counter, oblivious. That was the worst part. Nobody else could see it. Nobody else believed a word of it. They all chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe residue, from pie filling that I hadn't noticed until it baked itself into the groove of my conscience. But I knew the truth. Something was trapped under that glass, something that clawed and scraped and wanted out. By the third night, I was barely sleeping. I'd started bringing a small flashlight and parking beneath the flickering neon open sign, so I could stare at the pie case through the window before clocking in. The prints always appeared right around midnight, no matter how many times. I wiped them away. They reformed like ugly memories across the smooth surface. I tried different cleaning solutions, vinegar, ammonia, even a steam cleaner, but whatever it was left no residue behind. Only the shape, the suggestion of movement, the promise that at any moment something might break through. I began to feel the glass pull at me. Every time I walked past, I felt a prickle along my skin, like tiny teeth gnawing at my ankle. Sometimes, when the diner was empty and the back door was locked tight, I could swear I heard a soft slap, slap, slap against the inside of the case, as if whatever was there was practicing its escape, testing the boundaries, daring me to notice. My reflection in the glass wavered, the fluorescent lights dancing across the curved surface, and I half expected to see a face pressed beside mine, watching me through the pastry that lay just inches from its reach. I told myself this was the breaking point, the moment I'd either laugh it off and go home or grab a crowbar and shatter the case and prove once, and for all that there was nothing inside except sugar and crust. I even carried a small hammer in my jacket pocket, hidden beneath my apron, but every time I approached with intent, the diner's old pipes groaned like a living thing waking from a long sleep. The hollow whistle in the vents formed words I couldn't quite distinguish, but the single syllable underneath it all ran clear in my mind. Stay? Tonight, I had a plan. I was staying after closing, waiting for the prints to show up again, and when they did, I'd smash the case and watch the grease and glass spritz across the floor and finally end this endless terror. The crew left at 2, dragging garbage bags and wiping down tables, and when the last car pulled away, the diner coat fell silent except for the rumble of the deep fryer cooling off. I flicked off half the lights and sat in the corner booth, the booth closest to the pie case, my heart thudding so loud I could feel it in my throat. I watched the clock tick past midnight. 12:07, 12:08, and at exactly 12:09, I saw the first print smear itself into existence. I leaned forward, hand poised on the hidden hammer's handle, and then I saw them. Not one print, but dozens, as if a dozen hands had reached inside and dredged their way across the glass. They were elongated, slimy, and each fingertip ended in a pale sliver of what looked like bone. The air turned icy around me. The coffee urn gave one last gurgle and fell silent. The case lights flickered, then cut out altogether, leaving me in a cone of flashlight beam and shadowed periphery. I stood and fumbled for the hammer, knuckles white, and raised it behind my head. My breath fogged in front of me as I centered the swing, and then the glass groaned out. It wasn't a crack, but a slow, deep rumble from within the case itself, as if something were scraping against the back of its jail. I slid back against the counter, eyes wide, and the prints began to shift, rolling like living things into a single point at the center of the display. The pies trembled on their trays, wobbling like they might slide off at any moment. I tried to drop the hammer, but my fingers were locked around it, and the case lights sputtered back on, paling the room in sickly yellow. The prints were gone. The glass gleamed clear and innocent once more. The pie sat undisturbed, untouched by any living hand. The humming of the freezer in the back came as a relief, as if nothing had happened at all. And yet when I looked down at the hammer in my grip, I saw a smear of grease across the lens of my flashlight, stretching like a crooked grin, and I knew that whatever was trapped under that glass had found a way to thumb its own nose at me, and maybe even reach through, just enough to leave its mark on my world. I left the hammer on the floor, turned off the lights, and walked out into the empty parking lot, but that greasy smear is still there in my dreams, tracing its skeletal fingers across the inside of my skull, reminding me that some things are never meant to be set free. I pull into the lot just as the last bus sputters off down the highway, its taillights winking out like dying embers against the black sky. The diner's neon sign buzzes and stutters, casting sickly green shadows across the cracked pavement, and I realize I've driven 200 miles too far. Inside, the air is stale with the scent of burnt coffee and old grease. The booths, once bright red, are cracked and faded to a dull rust. I slide into one at the far end, heart pounding, because at the next table a woman sits holding a small boy. Their eyes are hollow pits, sunken so deep into their faces it feels like staring into black holes, and she rocks him slowly, humming a lullaby so soft my skin prickles. The song drips from her lips like cold water down my spine, a tune I swear I recognize but can't place, curling in the corners of my memory like a broken promise. Her dress is gray and threadbare. The edges of the fabric hang in shreds, like spiderwebs. The boy's head lolls against her shoulder, his pale cheek pressed into her collarbone, face pinched in an eternal sleep. His little hand clutches her blouse, knuckles white with a strength no child should possess. I glance toward the counter where a single waitress stands, arms folded, staring at us as though daring me to make a move. She doesn't say anything, only watches the humming mother and child with an expression so blank it might have been carved from stone. The jukebox in the corner is dark, silent, but I swear I hear it click once, twice, as if someone selected a song, and then the lullaby swells, filling every corner of the diner until the overhead lights flicker and settle into darkness. For a pulse of time I sit in pure blackness. Only the humming guides me, seeping through the booth's vinyl cracks until it seeps into my bones. I want to look away, to reach for my phone, anything, but my limbs refuse to obey. My breath hitches and I taste copper in my mouth. When the lights snap back on, the mother and child are gone, but the booth is still warm, the vinyl sticky, as though soaked in fresh blood. A lone teacup on the table shivers, as if you've just set it down, rim trembling against the saucer. A bead of sweat slides down my temple, and I twist around, expecting to see them slip out through the back door. but I'm alone, just me, the humming echoing in my ears. The waitress glancing over her shoulder, her face contorted now, mouth moving without sound. I slide from the booth, coffee sloshing in my mug, and the humming stops. There is a wet drag sound beneath my feet, and I back up until my shoulder hits the door frame. I look down, and there, stretched across the linoleum, is a trail of tiny footprints, bare, small, pressing into the dirt like the child walked on his knees. They lead behind the counter, vanish under the grill, then crawl out into the kitchen. Without thinking, I follow. The kitchen is a tomb lit by a single bulb swinging on a frayed wire. The walls are splashed with dried stains so dark they look black. In the center, illuminated by that sick yellow light, the mother kneels, facing away, bobbing her head to the lullaby only she can hear. The boy stands on the stainless steel table, his back turned to me, skin pale as moth wings, hands pressed flat against the cool metal. His hair drips water, though the sink behind him is empty, like he's just climbed from a deep lake. His dress is soaked through, clinging to his ribs. The lullaby ends, and he tilts his head back, voice low and gurgling, "Mama?" The mother turns, and I step back, foot catching on a fallen knife. The blade spins once before stopping point, glinting at my heel. She smiles then, swinging the boy into her arms, face slack and beautiful and terrible all at once. "Come," she whispers, "stay and sing with us." Her eyes are the black pits of some drowned thing, and beneath the table my blood runs ice cold. I scramble for the door, but it slams shut with a weight like a coffin lid. I pound on it until my knuckles bleed. The lullaby starts anew, filling the room, echoing off every corner, louder and louder, until the walls bleed shadows and the steam from the sink curls around my ankles. I can't breathe. I choke on the notes, hands pressed to my ears, but the song is inside me now, humming in my veins, and I know with a sick certainty I will never leave. The last thing I feel is her arms closing around me, skin wet and cold as drowned flesh, and the boy's empty gaze meeting mine. Then darkness. When the maintenance crew finds the diner the next morning, the doors are locked from the inside. No one answers the waitresses' calls. Inside, the booths sit empty, chairs pushed in neat rows. On one of the tables lies a single coffee cup, rim still warm, and beside it, a crumpled napkin with a single line written in smeared ink. "Come sing with us." The humming never quite leaves the air. I pulled into Gemma's diner just past midnight, my Chevy's headlights slicing through the velvet darkness that smothered the stretch of highway between Mesquite Bend and Blackwater Lake. The place sat like a lone tooth in an empty mouth neon. Letters buzzing in and out of sync, the sign half reading DNE when the bulb flickered off. Inside, the red vinyl booths glistened under fluorescent lights that hummed so low you felt them in your bones. I'd been on the road for 16 hours, coffee cold in a thermos, and when I saw him at the grill I thought relief had arrived. He moved with the metronomic grace of a surgeon, flipping patties on a grill slick with grease, the clang of metal spatula on metal plate echoing like a heartbeat. He never looked up. He never spoke. His eyes sharp as knives in a butcher's. Block-tracked every burger, every seam of color on the meat, and still he didn't blink. I settled at the counter, tapping my elbow in time with his flips, as if I could become part of his rhythm and earn mercy. When he finally slid a plate in front of me, it looked perfect. A cheeseburger stacked with lettuce so green it seemed phosphorescent. A smear of mustard in a perfect arc. Fries arranged like a miniature lance. I stared at it, mouth dry. He wiped his hands on a stained apron, then leaned forward, and for the first time I sensed his breath hot and ragged, like a pan left too close to flame. He set a ketchup bottle next to my plate, unlatching it with deliberate calm so that a bead fell and rolled across the counter. His gaze flicked to it, and in that instant I saw something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. An impatience, a hunger that had nothing to do with cooking. Then he nodded once and backed away, returning to the grill. I speared a fry. It was cold. My tongue met the soft center and I bit. The taste was right, but the texture was off past its prime. I forced myself to swallow. The burger, when I cut into it, was perfect down to the last glistening drop of juice, and I couldn't tell whether it was the best meal I'd ever had or something grotesquely wrong. I glanced at the cook. He was staring out the window, but I knew he wasn't watching the black road beyond. He was watching me. The diner fell silent except for the faint sizzle behind him and the hum of lights overhead. I heard a creak and the counter behind me shifted, so I turned and saw the entrance door wobble on its hinges as someone tried to push in. But no one entered. The door stayed ajar, and in the gap I glimpsed a shape slender, taller than me like a shadow stretched thin. With something shiny in its hand, I jerked upright, heart thundering, but when I turned back, the cook had moved. To my right, placing a fresh platter of burgers in front of an empty seat. He arranged them in a perfect circle, one for each booth, one for each broken window pane where moonlight scattered like glass shards. His movements were so smooth I almost believed they were rehearsed. A whisper of grease spat from the grill, and he stepped back, shoulders straight, face blank. Then he raised a hand and beckoned me to join the feast. I stood, legs trembling, and stepped toward him. The dinner plates, all silver rims and porcelain centers, held patties that pulsed under the light, as though they still lived. I reached out. His eyes snapped back to mine pinpoints of black ice, and in that frozen instant, I understood. This was a ritual he conducted every night. The highway ghosts passed through here, broken souls seeking warmth, and he fed them until their hunger was sated, until they became part of the grease. Part of the endless cycle of flipping and feeding and flipping. I tried to step back and my foot hit something wet. I looked down thick droplets of blood, slick and dark, leading from my booth to the grill. My throat went dry. I spun, ready to scream, but the cook was gone. The booth behind me was empty, silent, but the smell of iron and burned meat was all around. Then I heard it. A scrape of steel on steel, the soft rasp of a blade being honed. I whirled, heart in my throat, and there he stood again, towel over one shoulder, a chef's knife in his hand so long its tip hovered just above his palm, the metal gleaming. He raised it slowly, and the diner lights dimmed as if obeying his souffle. Will, time warped. I felt the seconds stretch like taffy. I knew I had one chance to run. I bolted, feet pounding against the linoleum, overturning a stool where a lone ketchup packet burst under my foot, squirting red in a perfect circle. The cook's footsteps were behind me, soft slaps against the floor, precise and unhurried. I threw open the front door and hit the asphalt outside, the night air like a wall of ice in my lungs. I didn't look back as the door slammed shut behind me, but I heard the click of the lock and then the sizzling undertone of that grill, so far away and yet under my skin. I ran until my legs gave out at the edge of the highway, slumping by the guardrail where black water gleamed miles below at Blackwater Lake. In the distance, headlights peeled off the road, then came back around. My breaths were shallow, the taste of rust and grease in my mouth. I know someone will find me here come dawn maybe, but I'll never go back. And when I close my eyes, I still see him in the glow of the diner's windows. The silent cook, flipping burgers, his blade dripping, his eyes never blinking, waiting for the next hungry traveler to stumble in. Night had settled over the shopping center like a shroud pressed low against your shoulders, the heat of the pavement still humming, faintly under the solace of your shoes even though the sun had vanished behind the distant hills. You turned up the Avenger key in the deadbolt and felt the reassuring click in your back pocket. Yet instead of heading inside, you found yourself drawn to the plate glass window that looked out onto the empty parking lot. Under the single lamppost in the center, its yellow glow sputtering as if fighting exhaustion, a dark figure paced back and forth in a slow, deliberate muffin. You blinked, and when you looked again, the figure was 10 feet closer. Your pulse jerked. You pressed your palm flat against the cool glass, watching the shadow lengthen as it obeyed some secret rhythm you couldn't hear. It should have been impossible. You lived on this stretch of farm-to-market road for 5 years, witnessed drunks staggering by on Friday nights, seen the occasional stray dog slink across the asphalt, but never someone pacing like that at 2 in the morning. Not someone who moved with the precision of a metronome, his head bowed, arms swinging in time with steps that seemed measured to an unseen beat. You told yourself it was a pranksome kid testing out a remote-controlled toy, moving a mannequin on wheels. Your mind chased that explanation until the figure halted directly under the lamp and lifted its head. That was when you saw the eyes red as embers. Not glowing, exactly, but reflecting the lamplight back at you like a broken promise. Hairs along your spine bristled. You swallowed, tasting iron at the back of your throat. For a moment you considered grabbing your phone, but your fingers felt heavy and slow, as if weighted down by molasses. Instead, you watched as the figure straightened, shoulders widening. Improbably, as though unseen hands were pulling its frame taut. Its steps resumed, and with each pass beneath the lamp, you saw that the face was neither human nor animal, but somehow both, elongated jaws, lips peeled back to reveal too many teeth, and the skin drawn so tight over its skull it looked like torn leather stretched over bone. You wanted to look away, to step back into the safety of your kitchen, but some part of you, a twisted curiosity, kept you rooted to the spot. You needed to see where it would go next. Then it swung toward you, pivoting at the waist with a slick, deliberate motion. You stumbled back as its head snapped your way, the eyes locking onto yours through the glass. There was no reflection where its eyes should have been, only darkness so deep it swallowed the glow of the lamp. You felt a grin. You could almost hear the sound of metal scraping against metal as its jaw extended, and a soft rasping laugh curled around your heartbeat. It started walking, slow and measured even as you fumbled for your phone. The latch of the door scraped as you yanked it open, cold concrete sending a shiver up your legs. You hadn't realized your boundary was only 10 yards away. By the time you reached the edge of the concrete apron, the figure was halfway across the lot, still pacing beneath the flickering light. Your heart pounded so violently you could hear it in your ears, thump, 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 but each time you blinked, the figure drew nearer. You raised your phone with a trembling hand and snapped a picture, anticipating the flash to reveal a trick. A hooded silhouette, a mannequin. But the image that popped up on the screen was nothing but darkness beneath the lamppost, save for 2 pinpricks of red that hung in the void. A slam of wind rattled the windows behind you, but when you twisted to look, the building remained still. Empty shelves and darkened corridors where you'd left cleaning supplies stacked neatly. No door swung open. No sound came from inside except your ragged breathing. When you turned back, the figure was gone from beneath the lamp. Panic spiraled in your chest. You raised both arms and shouted into the night, "Hey, who's there?" The only answer was the buzz of the lamp above and the whisper of cicadas in the scrub beyond the asphalt. Shaking, you took a step forward, scanning the edges of the lot where shadows pooled deep and hungry. Your eyes darted to the row of darkened cars parked near the far end. None belonged to you. You swallowed again, tasting bile. You dared to move closer to the car nearest the lot line, convinced the figure must be crouching behind it, ready to lunge. The night air pressed cold sweat to your skin, and each breath felt ragged, caught in a net of fear. You managed to close The distance, and when you peered over the hood, your reflection stared back blank and bright. No creature crouched behind. No sign of movement, only your own wide eyes and the lamppost's sickly glow filtering across the hood. You backed away, tripping over an old soda can, and landed hard on your knee. Pain shot up your leg, but you barely registered it. Your gaze jerked back to the lamppost, and your blood went cold. There, pacing beneath the light once more, was the figure, only now it looked cleaner somehow, its leather-like skin smooth and unmarred. It walked deliberately forward as though closing. A deal with the night. You scrambled to your feet and retreated, forcing your hand to grip the door handle of your car. Every step felt surreal, like you were moving underwater. Your phone slipped from your fingers, and the snap of plastic on asphalt sounded comically. Loud dot by the time you reached your car door, the figure had reached the edge of the lamp circle. Your windshield reflected a halo of yellow around its head like a mocking crown. You fumbled for your keys, slamming them into the lock and yanking the door open. You slid into the driver's seat, heart hammering so hard you thought you might shatter the glass. As you slammed the door shut, you saw the figure stop just beyond the light's reach, its grin stretching impossibly wide. Hands shaking, you cranked the engine. The headlights cut white arcs across the asphalt, but the figure stood still, its eyes fixed on you. As you threw the car into drive and roared out of the parking lot, the engine's roar drowned out every other sound. You risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The lot lay empty again, the lamppost flickering, the pavement shimmering with heat that hadn't been there a moment ago. Your breath came in ragged sobs as you swerved onto the road, mind screaming that you should look back, needling you to see if it followed. The highway stretched out under a black sky freckled with distant stars. You made it a mile before you slowed to a crawl, shaking so badly you could hardly steer. As you peered in the mirror again, the red glow caught your eye. Far behind you, just where the asphalt met the horizon, two tiny pinpricks of light pulsed, in time with your heartbeat. Then they vanished, like embers snuffed out. Your chest tightened. You realized the footsteps hadn't stopped. And somewhere beyond the reach of your headlights, the pacing continued, marking your escape with the relentless beat of something that knew exactly how close you were and how hard you tried to get away. You pull into the cracked asphalt lot just as the neon sign sputters to life, its gaudy red letters spelling welcome in a flickering welcome that feels more like a dare. Dust drifts in the yellow glow, floating motes dancing on the hot night. Air, and you can almost taste the stale coffee and burned oil that permeate these parts of West Texas. The roadside stop sits, battered between a long-forgotten gas pump and a trailer whose windows gape like empty eye sockets, and you're the only soul brave or desperate enough to be here at 3 in the morning. Inside, the air is thick with the sweet tang of cinnamon rolls gone cold and cigarette smoke that clings to the greasy linoleum tiles. You order a cup of lukewarm coffee from the lone waitress, whose smile is as fixed and tired as the painted barbed wire mural behind her, but you barely taste the bitter liquid. Your nerves hum beneath your skin, a low static that tightens your chest every time you glance back through the rain-streaked window at that sign. It pulses in the dark, welcome beckoning you back outside with the promise of safety, or maybe something darker. You decide to wait for your friend who'd promised to meet you here on the way home from the bar. Time ticks by in slow, grinding seconds, each strip of the neon a heartbeat in the void. You watch the sign's last bit of welcome blink out as the power flickers, and you miss the brief second of darkness. But when the red glow reignites, welcome has vanished. Instead, it scrolls your name across the dusty face in staccato brilliance. Jackson Miles. Your heart seizes, because that's you, and the sign doesn't have a second line yet. You blink, your vision wavered by the too bright light, and you realize the letters are rearranging themselves, glowing one at a time. Jatsi Kichisoan. You lean forward, palm pressed to the cool glass of the diner window, but the glass is too thick, too imperial, and the sign slips away, replaced by a date that makes your blood run thin. October 14th, 2025. You swallow and lift your coffee, but every sip tastes of ash and regret. The waitress hovers, her eyes distant, her posture stiff. You okay? She asks, voice bouncing against the walls like a beaten drum. You want to tell her, but your throat seizes. You shake your head, watching the numbers on the sign loop again, as if daring you to believe what they promise. It feels like a joke until you realize that date is only 3 months from now, and you've got nothing planned for mid-October except maybe the oil rig job your buddy's lining up. Your hands tremble on the chipped Formica countertop. You trace a long crack with your fingertip, wondering if that's where time itself fractures. Your friend doesn't show. You text him, but the message swirls into the dim haze of the diner before you can press send. The clock on the wall ticks unevenly, once, twice, then stops altogether. You glance back at the neon, but it's gone dark again. In the silence that follows, you nearly hear the sign breathing, inhaling in a practiced, sinister rhythm. Behind you, the waitress locks the door. You spin around, hard hammering, but she's just standing there, hands folded. Can't have folks sneaking out? When they know too much, she says, voice low and hollow. Before you can ask what she means, the lights flicker and die, leaving you in a world composed of shadows and the low hum of the sign deep outside. You push off from the counter, abandoning your half-finished coffee. The door resists your shove-locked, like she said, and you feel the weight of her stare behind you. You back away until your shoulder scrapes the wall, every nerve in your body sprinting. Then, through the darkness, a faint glow blossoms as the neon sign kicks back on. Your name and that date spin across the window in a cruel serpentine dance. Something inside you snaps, a rod of panic twisting in your gut. You lunge at the waitress, try to wrench open the door, but she's suddenly beside you, face featureless. In the dim light, better stay, she whispers. Time's easier to kill here. Her hand brushes your arm, cold as a tombstone, and you jerk away, stumbling backwards. Heart pounding so loud you're sure the sign can hear it. You rush for the back exit, but find nothing but a brick wall. The diner stretches impossibly wide, corridors elongating under the low ceiling, fluorescent tubes sparking in distant corners. It's like you've been sucked into a man-made labyrinth built by an architect with a cruel sense of irony. Every hallway is lined with those freckled tiles, every door sealed tight as a coffin lid. You dart into the first open doorway, and you're in a tiny storage room stacked with stale blankets and broken neon tubing. You slam yourself against the rickety door, press your ear to the wood, and hear the steady breeze of electricity humming from the sign, calling to you, telling you what will come. You can feel your pulse in the floorboards, vibrating through your spine, and you realize the date is no longer days away, it's tonight. The sign judges you even now on the empty gravel lot beyond the walls, already knowing you'll be back. Already marking you as the next soul swallowed dot, an unearthly hush fills the hallway, punctuated by the low buzz of neon. You don't know when you became part of the place, how its hunger claimed you the moment you read those letters, but you understand in the marrow of your bones that the sign doesn't just predict death, it demands it. You press your hand to a pile of blankets, thinking you'll muffle the door, thinking you'll hide, but nowhere to go and nowhere to hide when the sign lives in every shadow of this building. A distant click echoes as the storage room door creaks open, and you know the waitress, or whatever this thing is now, stands beyond, ready to guide you back under that red glow. Your breaths come in shards. You taste copper on your tongue. You wonder, not for the first time, if running would help. If clawing through the walls would give you a moment's respite, but there's no escape from what is already written. The neon sign is patient. It will wait until exactly 3 a.m. on its own unrelenting clock to reveal the final piece of your fate. You are nothing more than a name and a date to the light that burns in the darkness, and you know the moment its electric pulse flickers out forever, you will walk back into the night and death will walk beside you. You wake to the first low rumble of dawn, the sky still half draped in star-frosted darkness. The air tastes of wet pine and dust, the promise of a scorched afternoon already whispering through the cracks of your old farmhouse. As you swing your legs over the edge of the mattress, the wood groans under your weight, and you rub the sleep from your eyes only to find a shape crouched by the door, trembling in the weak glow of the hallway lantern dot. It's a dog, thin ribs visible beneath, matted fur that clings to its bones with a desperate hunger. Its nose is pressed to the plaster, paws splayed as though it's half willing itself through the barrier. You freeze, throat tightening, as a high-pitched yelp cuts the silence like a shard of glass. The dog lifts its head and you see it for what it truly is, eyes milky with fever, lips curled back in a sorrowful snarl. Its body shivers, not from cold, but from pain. Instinct propels you forward. You cradle the dog's head in your palms and whisper nonsense assurances you hardly believe. It stares at you through dull eyes, and you swear it knows something you don't. On a whim born of pity, you shuffle to the kitchen and fill a chipped enamel bowl with water. Outside, the wind rustles the pine needles like a ghost rustling through fabric. Back inside, the dog pads forward on spindly legs, but as you tilt its muzzle toward the bowl, its tongue flicks out and the water doesn't glisten. It takes a sip and nearly recoils, but stands its ground. Then you notice. The liquid spilling over its jowls is not water at all, but something dark and viscous. You catch it in the corner of your eye, the thick droplets pooling on the floorboards. And glistening like spilled tar. Horror wrenches at your gut when you realize it's not just dark, it smells of roasted coffee, heavy and acrid. More dark fluid seeps from the dog's snout, staining your hands when you wipe its muzzle. You swallow hard, head spinning, and the dog lets out another tortured yelp. As though in response to its own transformation, you set the bowl aside and stare at the creature. The kitchen clock ticks twice, and in that cruel rhythm you feel your heart pound. The dog's breath hisses through ragged lungs, and the droplets keep coming, dark rings spreading across the white floorboards. You'd have sworn they were blood at first glance, but you know raw blood, and this is something else. Something unnatural. Outside, a lone road snakes through the pasture, disappearing into a ridge of oaks. Beyond that, the Llano River murmurs in its bed, carrying the bones of drowned things. You once fished there as a child caught sunburned catfish and watched minnows dart through the shadows. But this dog is something older, something that belongs to darkness older than memory. You sink to your knees, trembling, and reach for the dog's collar. There is no tag, only frayed leather that smells of rain and rot. You brush back a strand of fur and find a scar, a jagged line, crusted with dried coffee granules. The dog stares at you, and you see your own reflection in its eyes, as if it peers through you into every dark corner you've ever hidden. A sudden, sharp knock at the door jerks you upright. Your blood turns to ice. Who could be here at this hour? No one visits before sunrise. The knock comes again, deliberate, patient. The dog's ears prick, its head tilting as though it comprehends the summons. You rise, legs rubbery, and cross the room. The knock intensifies, echoing in the emptiness. Beyond the walls. In the hallway, the lantern guttering, you pause. You glance back at the bowl, at the slick black puddle pooling on the boards. When you return, the dog is gone. Panic lashes at you. You sprint to the back door and fling it open, only to find the dog sitting on the porch, tail thumping feebly against the wood. Its eyes follow you, unwavering. Then, without warning, it dashes down the steps and into the fog-thickened dawn. You chase after it, stumbling over the porch rail, your heart slamming against your ribs. Out in the yard, the grass is wet with dew and regret. You can just make out the haze of the road, a ribbon of black ribbon beneath the gray sky. The dog stops at the edge of the yard and looks back, mouth clamped tight. You see the stain of coffee darkening its chin like a curse. Wait, you call, voice breaking, but the dog only whines, a sound that echoes farther than it should, and slips onto the pavement. You hesitate, torn between following and fleeing. Bird shrieks overhead, and you glance up to see a lone crow swoop low, talons skimming the air. It circles once, twice, as though marking a kill, and then dives beyond the trees. You feel the land tilt beneath you, as though something unseen is pulling you toward the road. You step off the grass and onto the asphalt, the cool surface sucking at your shoes. The dog moves steadily, head down, until it reaches a rusted metal sign that reads, "Welcome to Fallowfield." Below, in scrawled graffiti, someone has etched a single word, "Stay." The dog sits. Dark droplets beat at its lips, falling in rhythmic pulses. You approach slowly, and as you kneel, you see the puddle has formed a perfect circle around the dog, an unbroken ring on the highway, a stain that refuses to wash away. The smell of coffee is overwhelming, thick and bitter and cloying, coating your nostrils so you can almost taste it on your tongue. Your hand hovers, trembling, as you reach toward the dog's face. Its eyes lock with yours, and for one suspended. Heartbeat, you feel its hunger, ancient and hollow. You want to wrench your hand back, but some part of you, deeper than fear, compels you forward. Then the world tilts. The sign behind you groans, metal twisting like it's alive. Road dust swirls into a miniature cyclone, and from the ring of coffee-black asphalt, a shape begins to rise. At first, it's a ripple, as if the world itself is a pond disturbed by a stone. Then the stone emerges, a gaunt figure, limbs elongated, rising from the darkness of the stain. Its form is woven from shadow and steam, wisps of black curling where its fingers should be. The dog stands, barking once sharp, unnatural. Its fur bristles outward, and the dripping coffee turns red at the edges, like blood seeping through oil. You stagger back, mouth dry, and the creature's eyes are where its eyes should be, burn with a sickly, coffee-stained glow. It raises a hand that is half smoke, half solid, and beckons you. You can't look away. The sign snaps forward as though breathing, and you glimpse something impossible scrawled in rust along its edges. Behind you, you spin. Nothing but endless road and rolling fields. Then the air behind you freezes. You know without looking that something stands there, something patient, something that has been waiting for you since you offered that first sip. The dog pads beside you, mouth open in a silent howl, eyes reflecting the dawn's gray light. The shape in the ring glides toward you, the asphalt cracking beneath its weight. You feel the world waver, edges dissolving, and you realize with a sick lurch that you are not walking the road. You are part of the road now, entangled in its stain. You take a step back. The crow's cry slices through the haze, and the figure pauses, turning its head. Its face is a ripple, a smear of coffee and shadow, but behind it you think you see your own reflection twisted, hollowed, leaking sorrow. A final yelp from the dog, more human than beast, and it crouches at your feet, jowls dripping coffee like morning tears. You stiffen, heart lodged in your throat, and the figure raises its other hand. Something small appears between its fingers, a collar tag glinting in the half-light. You know in your bones it bears your name. Your breath catches, and the world. Narrows to that tag, the dog, the shape. You want to run, but your legs won't obey. The ring of coffee black asphalt pulses, drawing in all warmth, all hoped out, and as the first wing of dawn strikes the horizon, you realize you were never alone on this road. You never were. The dog was always the warning, bleeding the stain of truth. Some lost things aren't meant to find their way home. I remember the night the clocks went backward like it was yesterday, though everyone I knew looked 10 years older by dawn. The diner sat on a lonely stretch of highway outside Glen Ridge, Texas, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. Inside, the air was thick with coffee steam and cheap linoleum. The kind of place you stumbled into when your car broke down or you drove past midnight on an empty road, hoping someone would still be awake. That morning, at exactly 2:17 a.m., every clock wall. Clocks, pocket watches, wristwatches, everything in that diner paused, then shuddered and began to tick in reverse. No one asked why. No one dared to. I was the third customer through the door that night, already nursing a mug of bitter brew. The cook, a gaunt man named Earl, flipped eggs with a slow, deliberate rhythm. His face was lined like cracked leather, and his eyes didn't move. When the clock above the counter stopped, he didn't blink. He just kept cooking, as if nothing had changed. At first, I thought my watch was broken. Then I looked around. Betsy, the waitress, was staring at her wrist, her knuckles white. Across from me, a man in a ball cap reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a gold pocket watch, and watched its hands creep backwards. His face slackened, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. I glanced at the big clock on the wall. The minute hand was inching back toward the 12. A hush fell over the diner, so deep it felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. The refrigerator in the corner hummed backward, icing its compartments instead of defrosting. Outside, the neon sign sputtered welcome in reverse bursts of light. A car door in the parking lot opened, then slammed shut without anyone stepping out. The engine of a Harley went in reverse. Tires squealed backward down the gravel. Every sound seemed to rewind. "Something's wrong," Betsy whispered, voice quivering. She dropped her rag and it flew off her hand before she realized. She reached to pick it up, but the rag rose off the floor, floated back into her palm on its own. She blinked and dropped it again. It fell, then reversed midair, drifting upward. She swallowed, eyes wide as the rag settled neatly onto the table behind her. I wanted to laugh or scream, but my throat was clamped tight. Earl slid a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. I could smell the grease, feel the warmth of the plate, but the eggs were uncrispy, as if raw, but raw bacon is worse. I looked at my hands and saw age spots spreading across my knuckles, veins thickening in a web of dark blue, skin sagging as though every second tick reversed decades of youth. I forced my fingers into a fist and watched the flesh tighten. Spots vanish, turn into wrinkles. Each tick of every clock in that room stole a moment of my life and gave it back in reverse. But not to me. For every moment rewound, I aged a little. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, moon hanging low. I realized I was seeing stars vanish instead of twinkling into view. Time unfolded itself backward, and everything it touched was sucked into some dark abyss of unending reversal. Betsy backed away from the counter, stumbling over a stool that flew backward to untrip beneath her feet. She shrieked, hands pressed to her mouth. I tried to reach for her, but my arms felt two heavy bones knitting themselves brittle, muscles atrophying in the opposite direction. I could feel my hair thinning, gray creeping at the temples. Every second, the world robbed me of a piece I'd never get back. The man in the ball cap crawled toward the bathroom, dragging himself on his hands and knees. Each inch he gained felt like a mile, and then he slid backward toward his seat as though repelled by some invisible force. He looked at me with hollow eyes and mouthed, 217. Then his lips peeled away in a grin that revealed blackened gums and teeth like broken. Tombstone's dot, I wondered if I looked the same. My reflection in the diner's window showed a stranger, a hollow-eyed version of me with deeper creases, sunken cheeks. My jacket hung loose where it once fit snug. The watch on my wrist ticked backward against pale skin that no longer had. It's spring. I thought of home, of my little girl asleep in her bed, unaware that I might never see her grow up. I thought of the all too familiar hum of normal clocks until now, moving forward, carrying us through our lives one heartbeat at a time. Why? I whispered to no one. The diner echoed with the unanswerable question. The jukebox in the corner. Battered old FM model crooned the end of a song that started minutes ago, but the melody glitched backward. Notes spiked into nothing, instruments unplayed themselves. The scratchy voice of some long-forgotten singer unsang every lyric. I reached for the jukebox controls, but the buttons flew into the air, reversing into the panel. It looked like a performance of ghosts, invisible hands tapping each key in reverse. Earl began to speak, voice low and oddly distant. It only lasts till dawn. His words crawled backward from his lips, then reversed for me, but I understood. Till dawn, he repeated normally. Once the sun crosses that line, time rights itself, but we're not the same when it does. Betsy rushed over. It's been happening every night this week, she said. Her voice quavered. Not? Just here everywhere. People wake up older. Some vanish gone backward into nothing. No one talks about it because who'd believe you? I shook my head. My neck creaked and groaned like broken wood. Why here? Why now? I rasped. She shrugged. Her eyes glistened with tears that dripped upward toward her face. No one knows. She pointed outside. Look, I turned. Outside. The tall pines lining Highway 67 peeled their bark backwards, needles reattaching in clusters. A roadkill raccoon unsplayed itself organs sucked back into a rib cage. A coyote yawned, its empty stomach climbing onto its rib cage, filling in. Reverse, furry growing. The world was healing itself, mending wounds by undoing time, but leaving the living to wither. The fluorescent lights buzzed as their filaments reconstituted. The diner itself seemed to tilt, chairs dancing backward to their original positions before the building stood there. The entire diner reversed the moment it was built, illogically stretching time like a film reel going backward. I felt it. Coldness creeping up my spine as my joints reversed into rigidity. My pulse slowed until I could barely feel it, then reversed into a tremble. The planchette of life slid backward, and my world blurred around the edges. Then came the faint glow of dawn. Pale light spilled through the windows, painting the floor in muted gold. At 5:48 a.m., the clocks clicked over, minute hands sliding past 12 and beginning the forward march again. One by one, they shuddered back to life, ticking normally. The jukebox crackled, crashing forward into the next song. The fridge hummed on. The neon sign sputtered back to continue us on. The racers on Highway 67 roared into the distance, time resuming its arrow. Betsy collapsed onto a chair, eyes shut. Earl flipped a pancake and spat light at it like nothing had happened. His face was empty, unreadable. The man in the ball cap sat up straight, dusted himself off on dust. He smiled, younger than before, but his eyes still hollow. A family of four burst in, chatting about breakfast specials, oblivious. Two road crew guys with hard hats stomped past the window on their way to work. A trucker with a CB radio winked at me. Everything was normal again, except for me. I stood frozen, trying to will my limbs forward. My watch ticked normally, but my bones felt reversed. I staggered to a mirror behind the counter. The reflection that looked back was me, but older, much older. My hair was gray, my eyes sunken, my hands gnarled. I touched my face, skin creasing under my fingers. I'd aged 5 years in the hour the clocks ran backward, my life stolen one tick at a time. I turned to Earl. "Why are you not older?" I croaked. He shrugged, flipped the pancake, and set it on a plate. "Been here too long," he said, voice flat. "You get used to it." He slid the plate to Betsy, who stared at the pancake like, "It was a dream. We're all here when the clocks go backward. We don't belong in forward time anymore, so we don't change. But you came in when it started, so you aged." He stepped aside. "You paying or walking?" I didn't have the strength to walk. I paid, the bills feeling heavy in my aged fingers. Betsy printed a slip, handed it over without looking at me. I shuffled out, each step a struggle as my legs felt ancient. Outside, the highway stretched empty, sunlight washing over the pavement. I blinked, trying to clear spots from my vision. A car approached in the distance. It passed me without slowing, window down, radio blasting a trucker talk show like nothing odd had happened. I looked down at my hands, watched as a young kid walked past the diner entrance and into the glow. He stopped, looked back at me for a moment, then glanced at his watch. The boy's face paled. He ran back inside as the clock struck 2:17 again, unseen by the morning shift. The diner lights flickered once time, reversed by a heartbeat. The boy aged 10 years in an instant, hair graying, skin sagging. The waitress from the morning shift saw him collapse and screamed. I don't know if many survive that first backward tick. As for me, I'm 70 now, and I still live outside Glenridge. Every night at 2:17 the clocks rewind, and every morning at 5:48 they snap forward, stealing whatever years I have left and leaving me behind. Sometimes I wonder if anyone notices if they see the empty seat in that diner, or the man who goes a little more crooked each dawn. But mostly I just sit, waiting for the backward tick, clutching the life I've got left and praying the clocks will stop rewinding someday, or that I'll disappear into the backward flow and finally be free of time's cruel joke. The first time I saw her was when the neon sign outside Mama June's diner flickered its open in a shaky rhythm, like a dying heartbeat. It was past midnight, the desert air hanging heavy with the scent of creosote and hot asphalt, and I rolled in on hollow tires, the old Chevy's headlights cutting through the haze in the parking lot. Inside, the booths were empty except for one, her station, where she stood waiting, pencil poised over the battered menu like she already knew exactly what I'd order. Her eyes were too still, like polished onyx. She smiled when I slid in, and it felt like the moment she did, she knew everything that had happened in my life. I'd come back home to Bristol, Texas, after 15 years away, trying to outrun memories I didn't think would still be alive in the shriveled ghost of a town. Back then, when I was 12, my sister Lily had vanished in the night we buried her dog out back, and later, we buried Lily too, or at least that's what my parents said. But I always knew what really happened. Only me and her knew. I ordered black coffee and a cheeseburger, struck with the sudden hunger that only fear can bring. She dropped my plate so lightly it didn't rattle, then slid the coffee across the Formica tabletop. "Stir in a little cream?" she asked softly, as if she were the one stirring my memories. I nodded, reached for the little plastic container, but my hand trembled. No cream would ever wash away that night. Lightning flickered in the distance, low on the horizon, and I saw her silhouette behind the counter, her face pale in the fluorescent buzz of the kitchen light, as though she had always been waiting. When I finally chewed through the dry bun, I heard her voice again, calm and intimate. "You always hated cheeseburgers." You said meat made you sick. My pulse spiked and I swallowed. My heart felt like a bird flapping frantically against a cage. I looked around the diner. The other booths were empty, but I could sense something in the dark corners shifting. She slid in across from me, no footsteps, just a ghost gliding, her hair curling around her shoulders like smoke. You said that because your sister loved them, and you wanted to make her happy. You lit her birthday candles every year. You sang Happy Birthday off-key so she'd giggle. She paused and the jukebox in the corner crackled, kicking out a scratchy tune from the 1950s. I couldn't speak. The diner felt too small. The walls leaned in, stained with grease and secrets. The coffee had gone cold, a curled lip of steam rising in slow tendrils. You killed her, the server said, voice soft as a lullaby. You promised to protect her, but that night you left her in the backyard crying for help. You watched through the window as the ground swallowed her laugh. Then you buried her beside the dog where no one would find her. My fingers clawed at the edge of the table. I wanted to deny it, but the only thing louder than her words was the pounding in my skull. The door rattled when the wind gusted, and I saw the ticking wall clock, 2:17 a.m. Time had stopped the moment I screamed for help and no one came. She leaned closer, her breath brushing my ear like cold rain. I've always known. Everyone else forgot, but I remember. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes like empty wells. Did you think I wouldn't tell? Did you think you could live with your secret forever? She traced a finger along the rim of my coffee cup, leaving a smear of darkness. But I know what happened. I remember Lily's face when she saw you holding that shovel. I tried to back away, but the booth swallowed me. The fluorescent lights sputtered, and the jukebox groaned, switching songs without warning. I looked at her, at that impossible silhouette, and realized she was not human. Her skin was too pale, her smile too wide, and behind her eyes I could see the faint imprint of every foolish apology I ever whispered into the Texas night. Thunder rolled, and the windows rattled. Outside, lightning revealed the twisted mesquite trees leaning like mourners. When I turned back, the waitress had placed something on my plate, a small, dirt-streaked photo of Lily, her face bright and laughing beneath the sun. I remember that dress, the red one with white daisies. I'd seen that photo once, tucked in Lily's Bible. Now it lay in front of me, damp with unseen moisture. I reached out, heart slamming like it would burst through my ribcage. She shook her head, black hair sliding across her face. You thought you could hide from what you did. Her voice warped, low and guttural. But here, everything comes back. The air grew thick, oppressive, smelling like damp earth and something foul-rot decay. The lights dimmed, plunging us into half shadows. I could hear my own blood rushing, like footsteps pacing in my skull. On the table, the burger began to twitch. The patty squirmed, cracking open to reveal something glistening, a small bone, dark as coal. I stared, throat tight, as the bone's edges ground against the plate, chipping ceramic. The coffee rippled, black fingers reaching out as though alive. I couldn't tear my eyes away from this grotesque symphony. The server watched, smiling, triumphant, and somehow relieved. I tried to stand, but my legs refused. She leaned back, folding her hands. The jukebox struck a final chord, and the light snapped off. Pitch black, and suddenly I heard Lily's voice, soft and echoing, calling my name. Brother? The sound came from the ceiling, the windows beneath my feet. I closed my eyes, squeezed them shut, but her whisper persisted, curling around. My bones. When the lights came back on, the plate was empty, the coffee mug overturned, the photograph gone. The booth was empty too. I was alone in Mama June's diner, save for the worn-out menus and the humming fluorescent bulbs. I stumbled to the door, threw it open, and fled into the storm. The wind lashed at me, rain burning my face, lightning cracking the sky wide open. I ran until the neon sign faded behind me, until Bristol was nothing but a smear of yellow light and secret hush. Now, wherever I go, I can taste coffee in the rain. Every diner seems to hold her gaze. Every server has that same stillness in her eyes. And sometimes, late at night, just as I'm drifting off, I hear the whisper, "Did you think you could bury her?" In my dreams, the dirt turns to coffee, the shovel to a bone. I wake choking on the memory, and I know she's still there, that waitress who knows everything, standing beside me, waiting for the moment I let her in again. I pulled off the highway just past midnight, the neon sign of the Prairie Moon Diner humming like a confused firefly in the empty stretch of road. The air was thick with the smell of hot grease and old linoleum, the diner's fluorescent bulbs flickering in a slow, mocking rhythm. Inside, the booths were empty, save for the one at the end where a man in a faded baseball cap stared out at me, his coffee mug already full. I slid onto the vinyl seat opposite him, the sour tang of bleach on the table making me wince. The waitress appeared without a sound, as though she'd been waiting in the shadows. She asked if I wanted coffee. I didn't even think said yes before I knew I was thirsty. She nodded, and when she left, I heard the steady drip of the pot, a slow, deliberate beat that filled the silence. The first cup tasted like bitter metal hot at first, then cool as it hit my tongue, and finally cold in the back of my throat. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin, the fibers scratching my fingers, and signaled for a refill. The waitress returned, her eyes hidden behind bangs, her face so pale I thought she might be a trick of the fluorescent lights. Without asking, she poured again. The pot was half empty, or so I thought, but the coffee level in my mug didn't drop. It rose. Each sip felt like swallowing ice, the steam crawling down my throat, leaving an emptiness that nothing seemed to fill. I glanced at the man in the cap. He didn't move, but I sensed him watching. I met his eyes, but they were vacant, like glass windows with no one inside. I lifted my mug, the porcelain handle slick with condensation, and drank again. This time I tasted something else beneath the bitterness, a fleeting sweetness like honey that's gone rancid. I shivered. The diner's door jingled, someone passing by outside, though I saw no headlights on the highway, no other cars in. The empty lot. The man in the cap turned his head slightly, and I thought I saw a shift in his grin, as if teeth were extending just past his lips. Too many teeth, small and jagged. Another refill? The waitress's voice was soft, almost urgent. She hovered over the pot. I nodded, my throat raw. She tilted the pot again. The coffee sloshed, the dark liquid gleaming under the flickering overhead light. I could see my reflection in the surface, distorted, my eyes sunken, my face pale. I drank until the mug was empty, but I knew it wasn't. I set it down, fingers trembling, and the waitress took it away, filling it instantly for me. The man in the cap didn't blink. I swallowed hard and tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. My head felt heavy, as though swollen with glass shards. The waitress slid onto the seat beside me without a chair, her presence sudden and impossible. "Drink," she whispered, tilting the mug toward me. I didn't want to, but the cold seeped into my bones, and my hand lifted of its own accord. As I drank, the taste shifted again, smoke and ash, like something burned here long ago. My vision swam, and I felt someone brushing against my arm. I looked up to see the man in the cap still there, his empty mug now full, a thin ribbon of steam curling above it. He lifted the mug in a silent toast. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows. A sign on the wall read, "Closed." Mondays, but it was Tuesday, or at least I thought it was. Time seemed to slip here, measured not by clocks but by coffee refills. The pot never emptied. I strove to count the refills 7, 8, maybe 9, but the moments blurred together, each sip colder, each taste stranger than the last. I realized I wasn't just drinking coffee. I was drinking memories. Faces flickered in the steam. A little girl with hollow cheeks, a man in a mechanic's uniform with oil-stained hands, an elderly woman knitting by a stove. Each face stared at me, pleading. Then they were gone, replaced by another. I tried to speak, to ask what this was, but my voice came out in a dry croak. The waitress leaned close, her breath like old lace. "They never leave," she said, and her eyes glowed briefly in the dull light. "Not really." She reached out, tracing the rim of my mug with a finger that left a smear of dark residue. "They keep coming back, same as the coffee." I stumbled backward, crashing into the table. The man in the cap remained unmoving, as if part of it booth itself. The waitress hovered in the air, weightless, her hair drifting like kelp in water. The jukebox in the corner sputtered to life, playing a warped tune I half recognized, something about a midnight train and a restless passenger. The words warped, twisting into moans. I tried the door. It wouldn't budge. Windows were dark, showing only stars and dunes. The coffee pot on the counter winked at me, a pulse of steam like a beckoning hand. I heard a chorus of whispers behind me, low and urgent. "Drink, drink, drink." My mouth moved on its own, lips parting. The waitress handed me the mug again. I lifted it. As the cold liquid slipped past my lips, I felt a slow tearing inside me, like a door opening in my chest. A memory, my grandmother's kitchen, the taste of her coffee, warm and sweet-surfaced, then twisted. Her face, smiling gentle, warped into something monstrous as I gulped it down. I gasped, the memory slipping into the mug, disappearing into the pot dot. When I looked up, the man in the cap was gone, and the waitress stood behind the counter, sweeping coffee grounds into the sink. The jukebox was silent. The place was empty. The mugs were all full. I dropped my own mug. It shattered on the floor, coffee spreading like spilled ink. A dozen tiny mugs materialized on the table, each filled to the brim. I backed away, horror clawing at my lungs. Above me, the neon sign flickered its last. The word coffee half lit, buzzing in the darkness. The waitress leaned forward over the counter, her pale face inches from mine. "You can leave," she said gently, "but they'll come with you." She pointed to the mugs. "Everyone contains a piece of them. Keep drinking, or they'll drink you." I ran. Out the back door into the sand, barefoot under a sky so black it felt like a wound. I heard the door creak behind me, a final echo. Somewhere in the distance, the jukebox tune lingered, twisted and distant, carrying the weight of 100 lives trapped in a coffee pot that could never run dry. As I reached my car, I glanced back. The diner's lights were gone, but the neon sign glowed faintly, the word moon pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I started the engine, hands shaking, and drove off. The highway stretching empty before me. Hours later, when I finally stopped, I found a coffee stain on my shirt, and in my jacket pocket, a small porcelain mug filled with dark liquid that steamed. In the pale dawnlight, I dropped it, but it didn't shatter. The coffee rippled, and in the surface I saw eyes hungry, patient, waiting for me to drink again. The diner sat on the edge of nothing, a flickering neon sign casting jaundiced light across the cracked asphalt, the Texas wind rattling the loose boards of the roof. I was closing up, wiping down the Formica countertop, humming to keep my nerves steady. It had been another long night rain spitting against the windows, the highway slick with shadows, but I'd grown used to the emptiness, the hollow ache of silence broken only by the hum of the fridge and the drip of the neon transformer. I stacked the last of the mugs and straightened my apron when I heard it. A soft scuffing, high above in the rafters, like someone shifting their weight across unseen beams. My heart stalled, throat tightening. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. The roof access hatch was locked from below, bolted tight. Only I held the key. I froze, brush in hand, listening to the scrape again, closer this time, as though something heavy was being dragged across the joist directly overhead. My breath. Hitched, and I must have whispered, "Hello?" But the word dissolved in the stale air. The scrape stopped, and in the sudden, deafening quiet I felt every drop of sweat bead across my back. I forced my shoulders to unclench and told myself it was just the wind, a branch brushing against the eaves, a loose board shifting. I picked up the key ring, its metal teeth cold in my palm, and walked toward the back door, planning to bolt it extra tight. That's when I saw them, muddy boot prints on the countertop, 13 heavy tread marks, each one smeared in damp earth, leading in from the front window and stopping just shy of the edge where I stood. The pattern was unmistakable, military style. Sawless, deep lugs that gripped the surface as though someone had climbed right down from the ceiling and walked straight to me. My stomach soured. Outside, the rain had turned the dirt road into a swamp of mud. The prints looked fresh, like the boots had been caked only moments ago. I staggered back, hand flying to my throat, pulse pounding so loud it nearly drowned out the ticking clock behind the register. Each print appeared in sequence, as though someone invisible had marched across the counter solely to let me know they were here. I snapped my head upward, eyes straining through the dim light toward the dark, empty rafters. There was nothing but shadows and tangled ductwork, the metal glinting faintly. No boots, no body, no sign of how the prints had formed. A groan of shifting wood echoed again above me, and my knees buckled. I dropped to one knee, chest heaving, staring at the final print closer now, right at the lip of the counter, almost, as though it marked the place where someone had paused to stare at me. I had the sinking feeling I should run, but adrenaline froze my legs. Above me, the rafters groaned and settled, and a single drop of water fell through a crack, splattering onto the print. Mingling with the mud dot, I forced myself up and grabbed the broom, balancing it like a weapon. My phone lay on the counter, screen dark. I snatched it, fumbled for the flashlight, and swept the beam up to the rafters. The light caught the edge of the hatch cover, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw it shift just a hair's breadth. I swallowed, mouth dry, and called out, "I know you're up there, come on down." My voice cracked, and I wanted to laugh, to shake my head at myself for believing in ghosts. But something in the air had changed. The din of the rain seemed to smooth into a low, pulsing hum, and the beams overhead felt closer, oppressive, as though the roof itself leaned in to watch me. I took a shaky step back and tripped over a stool. The lid of the hatch rattled, and I dropped the broom, curse tumbling out of me. Mud spat onto the floor around me as the hatch cover creaked open, inch by inch. A face appeared, pale, skeletal. Eyes wide and unblinking, then a pair of legs in mud-spattered boots slipped through. Boots exactly matching the prints on the counter. Before I could scream, the thing stood upright, its shoulders brushing the low ceiling. It paused, head cocked like a curious bird, studying me with an empty fascination. The boots left fresh prints on the creaking plank as it stepped fully into view, hunched under the ceiling's weight, hands too long, nails like scorched claws. I backed against the counter, desperation blooming in my chest. "Please," I rasped. I didn't know what I was bargaining for, but I prayed it would spare me. The creature took a slow, deliberate step forward, and I smelled it then, a sour, fetid odor like drowned earth left to rot. It reached out a hand, fingers brushing the countertop, tracing the line of its own prints with a tenderness that sent a spike of revulsion through me. Its face, half hidden in shadow, broke into a grin that stretched too wide, lips cracked and dry, revealing teeth blackened and jagged. I lunged past it, darted toward the door. My hand caught the latch and yanked, but the handle spun uselessly. The thing's head snapped toward me, eyes shining with a cruel amusement. It rose onto the balls of its boots, towering despite the sloping ceiling, and let out a soft, almost affectionate sigh, like the sound of damp leaves rattling in a breeze. Then it moved. I felt the boards vibrate as it slid forward, each heavy boot pressing into the counter with deliberate weight so that the prints advanced toward me in real time. I slammed my shoulder into the door again and again until the frame cracked. The creature watched, fingers tapping its chin as though curious about my efforts. Then it took another step, its boots slicing the air where my throat would have been. A clean arc of soil thrown up. In that moment, something primal tore through. Me fight or flight, I don't know which, and I turned, swung a chair at its back. The wood shattered, splinters flying. The thing let out a sound, half laugh, half groan, and spun, slamming its palm against the counter. The impact sent a wave through the steel edge that rocked me back. The counter buckled, and I thought for a heartbeat it might collapse, but it held. The creature reared, boot raised, and I realized I would die here, pinned between the door and the countertop for no reason that made sense in the waking world. Then the hatch behind it slammed shut, hard enough to shake the rafters, and the creature froze, head snapping to the ceiling. Its eyes widened. Whatever amusement had curled its lips flickered out, and it half roared, a sound like gravel grinding underfoot. It hesitated, boot poised in midair, and I seized the moment. I dove under the counter, slipping on the muddy floor, tumbling out the back entrance into the rain and darkness. My fingers tore at the padlock until it gave way, the door swinging open onto the soaked gravel. I didn't look back as I ran, didn't dare to see if it followed. Behind me, the diner's neon blinked on and off, a stuttering heartbeat against the sky. The wind carried a final sound, the scrape of boots against wood, fading into the night. And when I finally dared to look up, the rain-washed rooftop was empty. Mud streaked the windows, but inside the prints had vanished as if they'd never existed. I stood under the cold rain, chest heaving, and wondered how something could step out of the dark and leave behind only footprints and terror that would never wash away. There wasn't supposed to be anyone here. I'd locked the doors at midnight and dropped the bolt into place, the echo clacking through the empty diner like a judge's gavel. The neon open sign had flickered off 20 minutes ago, leaving the room coated in shadows so thick you could scoop them up. I stood behind the counter, leaning on my elbows, the stainless steel cold against my palms, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator sputter in the back. Outside, the highway lay silent, the puddles on the cracked asphalt gleaming under. A wan moon. It was just me, my coat hanging neatly behind the register, and the ghosts of every late-night coffee I'd poured over the past few months. That's when I saw it, a fedora, perched on the hook above the seats in booth 3. I blinked, willing my eyes to focus. That hat wasn't mine. It was black as oil, the brim turned up just so, and though it looked dusty older than dust, it lay alongside a well-worn tweed jacket, shoulders slumped as if draped over a body no longer there. The coat rack rattled, gentle as a whisper, against the plaster wall. My heart hollered, and suddenly I was standing, every nerve alive. I told myself it was the wind, somehow slipping under the screens, but the doors were locked from the inside. I told myself mice had crawled through the vents, but the windows were sealed. I told myself I was tired, hell. I'd pulled a double shift and my head was swimming, but when I moved closer, each of those items felt like truth turning ice. The jacket's sleeve sagged, empty. The hat's crown was crushed in a way that reminded me of a skull. My reflection in the chrome griddle distorted, small and faint. I reached out to touch the brim, half expecting it to vanish, and my fingertips. Brushed leather as soft as skin. Beneath the hat, a single strand of hair clung, gray and stiff. My breath caught. I cradled it, turning it over in my fingers. It smelled faintly of rot. My brain tried to sort things into neat boxes, old, moth-eaten, just debris. But my gut twisted and screamed at me. Something was here. Something real. Something that had worn that jacket every night when this place still bustled. I retraced the diner's history. Myrtle's Grill. Open 24 hours until the fire in '83. They told me the blaze started in the kitchen, a grease fire nobody could control. 3 bodies found in the break room, charred. One of them was the regular Bill Dawson every midnight, coffee black, no sugar, never left before 2, then the fire. Flames swallowed the lot and the diner closed forever. I'd reopened it 6 months ago, chasing rent checks and a place to hide from my own ghosts. I'd learned the local Taylor's diner closed in daylight for years. People claimed to see the waitress's apron still pouring coffee at 2 a.m. I'd laughed them off. Until now, the hat and jacket sat ready, as if someone had just peeled them off and strutted out the door. But there was no one. The booth was empty, the vinyl seat cooling in the stale air. My phone lay dead on the counter. Battery plummeted for no reason. I flicked the lights, nothing. The single overhead bulb hummed and winked out. I stumbled for the fuse box under the counter, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I yanked the lever, every bulb in the diner snapped back to life, harsh and bright. The hat was gone. The jacket was gone. Just the booth, pristine, waiting. I backed away, vision swimming. There was a scrape on the floor where the coat rack stood, gouged into the tile like nails dragged across stone. My boots felt sticky. I knelt and touched the smear. It was dark, fresh. It smelled of coffee and blood. I told myself I had to leave, call someone. I had to step outside and breathe just one breath of North Texas air, where sage and dust mingled with the distant hum of the highway. My hands moved to the door handle. Then I heard it, the chair scraping against the floor. From booth 7. I swung around, chest-heaving. In booth 7 sat a man. He wore the same fedora and tweed jacket as if he'd slipped into them a heartbeat ago. His back was to me, his shoulders perfectly still. The diner lights painted his silhouette across the tabletop, elongated and thin. He was reading a menu, one hand holding the paper, the other drummed the formica like he was waiting for service. Steam curled from a coffee cup. Perfect calligraphy milk foam spelled my name on its surface. J-O-N-H. My tongue caught. I had never met him, and yet that cup was warm enough to burn. I took a step forward. He didn't look up. His movements were too deliberate, too human. My mouth dry, I called out, "Sir?" He lifted his head, revealing a face that was neither living nor death. His eyes were pit's absence shining through. His grin was a split in a tombstone. I could see the yellow of his teeth, the red where flesh clung to jaw. He laid the menu on the table and reached for the cup. Each finger snapped into knuckles that cracked. "Jonah," he said, voice low and slow like ice cracking across. "Frozen Lake. You forgot me." My knees gave out. I collapsed into the tile floor, sliding until the counter caught my elbow. My eyes traced the empty booths. They were all full now, couples, strangers, families, all with ghostly jackets draped. Across their backs, hats hung on racks. All sipping coffee in silence, watching me. I scrambled up, fumbling for my phone still dead. I whirled, ready to bolt through the staff door at the back. The walls closed in, the formica table stretched like ribs. The far lamp swung, pendulum. Slow. I could almost see the brand new plywood I'd installed in the kitchen, the fresh paint on the walls, the optimistic neon sign outside. But ghosts don't mind plywood or neon. They cross the barrier between when the day has forgotten them. I fled to the window. Outside was the highway, empty, the moon retreating behind a cloud. No headlights, no passing cars, no mercy. I yanked at the door. It resisted. I looked down and realized the handle was round, like on a safe, and had no keyhole. This door hadn't existed before. There was only the single back entrance to the alley, but it was bricked over now, a solid wall with a fresh mortar line. I pounded against it. My fist stung, red drops blossoming where bone met flesh. No sound came through except the steady drip of my blood. The diner fell silent. The overhead hum cut out, a hush great enough to drown in. And then the music started. A scratchy old jukebox in the corner warbled a song I recognized from childhood. Blue Moon crooned the scratchy voice. Light flickered around the bakers. Rack, illuminating powdered sugar on pie cases that I hadn't stocked. The air smelled of cherry and brimstone. He stood behind me, the phantom regular, his dry breath on my neck. "You let me in," he whispered. "I let you out. I couldn't move." My world shrank to his shadow. He raised his hand, pointing at the door that wasn't there. "Time to close," he said. When I woke, the sun was high and blistering. I lay on the tiled floor, bones aching, mouth full of grit. The diner looked empty and normal. Lights off, no sign of coffee or cup or coat rack. I staggered outside through the wide glass door I'd never unlocked. The sign read closed in daylight, just like the old stories said. The highway roared by, oblivious. I walked away, gravel crunching under my boots, heart pounding, sure I'd never return. But at home, when I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, there was a faint stain where the shoulder met the hanger. Coffee grounds or maybe blood. I haven't slept since. Every night, I dream of that diner, and I feel the phantom regular's eyes on me, asking when I'll serve him again. I hear his churr scrape. I taste that black coffee on my tongue, colder than the grave. And I know that one day he'll let himself in again, and this time he won't let me out. I've spent enough late nights behind the counter to know the eerie rhythm that settles into a nearly empty diner just after midnight. The fluorescent bulbs hum their tired stutter over formica tables, scarred by years of cigarette burns and spilled coffee, and the red vinyl seats sag as if relieved that the rush has finally thinned to a trickle. Tonight, I'm the only customer, and the waitress who sets my black coffee in front of me is someone I've never seen before, a tall woman in a blue polyester uniform. Her hair hidden under a fraying net, her eyes too bright beneath the halo of the neon sign outside that spells DINER in flickering letters. She smiles once, slow and knowing, then moves down the line, wiping surfaces that look spotless already. The bell above the door jingles, and I barely glance up before it shrieks again, louder and sharper, though no one stepped inside. That's when she appears beside me, carrying a small metal bowl with a loose-fitting lid. It clatters on the counter. "Here you go, sugar," she says, voice low and husky, as if she holds secrets she can't quite let slip. Her hand lingers at the rim, and I find myself staring at the bowl as if drawn into some dark current. I lift the lid slow, feeling my heart drum in my throat, because the crystals clinking softly under the harsh light are not grains of sugar. They are teeth, perfect little molars, gleaming and white, each one capped with a tiny smear of what looks like coffee residue, so fresh it pools in the tiny grooves. I freeze, hands trembling. A single tooth rolls to the edge of the bowl and stops, suspended in that impossible moment before it would fall. The woman's eyes catch mine in the reflection of the countertop. "Add sweetness," she whispers, and for a second, the room tilts, like I've stepped into a dream whose rules I can't trust. Coffee floods my cup, black and warm in my shaking hands, but all I can see are those teeth, gleaming like bone-white stars stranded on a midnight sea of chrome. Every diner. I've worked and carried rumors, ghost stories meant to scare the new. Hires talk of a strangled hitchhiker or a lonely widow who lured coffee drinkers to their doom with promises of homemade pie. But this doesn't feel like any rumor I've heard. This is too real. Each tooth the perfect replica of the ones I carry, the ones my dentist counted last week when he said I had good, healthy enamel. My breath fogs on the coffee's surface. I want to push the bowl away, call for the manager. Demand someone explain why there's a bowl full of human teeth sitting where diners normally pour sugar. But the waitress stands silent, her face calm, waiting for me to do something I can't quite name. I lift one tooth between thumb and forefinger. The enamel is cool under my skin. It feels heavier than it looks. I press it to my tongue, and for a moment the enamel scratches the soft flesh, a sensation like walking barefoot across gravel, but then it dissolves into nothing, sharpness vanishing. Into a sweetness so bitter I want to fling it across the room. My stomach twists. I swallow, trying to clear the taste, but it's already in my blood, coursing in every nerve ending. The waitress watches me, arms folded, shadow pooling beneath. Her eyes, behind her, the neon sign buzzes and flickers. Outside, cars pass by in restless currents, headlights scouring the windows as if daring to look inside. But here, in this strangled oasis of artificial warmth, time feels unhinged. My watch, laying next to the napkin holder, ticks backward for a heartbeat once, twice before I blink, and it rights itself. Clocks don't run in reverse. Teeth don't fill sugar bowls. Yet here I am, tasting teeth, drinking sweetness brewed from nothing human eyes should behold. I set the tooth on the counter and stand so fast the stool legs scrape. The waitress smiles wider, a crescent of teeth and shadow. "You'll need more," she says, as if reading my panic. It's a bitter dawn without it. I back away, voice caught in my throat, and see now that the walls are lined with photos' faces pinned up like trophies. Each one grinning in life, each one missing a tooth. Fragmented portraits, yellowed at the edges, names scrawled in the corner. Marion Lang, Tommy Daniels, Elder Finch. Their eyes stare, pleading, accusing. I know those names. They were the missing. The hitchhiker whose car was found abandoned. The child who vanished on his way home from school. The old man who never returned from his morning walk. All gone, without trace, only teeth left behind, or so the rumors. Said that I stumble away from the wall, heart hammering like a tripwire. The waitress lifts the lid again, and more teeth clink inside, fresh and new, as if the bowl refilled itself in the seconds I wasn't looking. The cash register screen glows behind her. Instead of numbers, it flashes the date of my birth, the date of my mother's death, and one more date today's followed by a question mark. My face pales. I lean forward, finger trembling, and tap the screen. The question mark vanishes, replaced by a single line. Smile dot, then the door behind me slams. I spin, expecting to see someone entering, but the diner is empty. The neon sign outside sputters, and in that electric flash I glimpse the silhouette of the waitress framed in the window tall, still, holding the sugar bowl to her chest as if it were a child. I fling open the door into the muggy Texas night. The street is empty, silent except for the pulse of the sign and the distant wail of tires on asphalt. My sandals slap the pavement, and I run, following the broken line of neon down the dark road until the diner is nothing but a dying glow behind me. When I look back, the windows are dark, the sign cold. No neon, no diner, nothing except the faint echo of that metallic jingle. In my pocket, The sugar packet I grabbed as I fled one of those old-fashioned white packets feels heavy. I rip it open, and powder drifts across my palm, fine as bone dust. I bring it to my lips and wash it down, because I know it's coming. Teeth will grow there in that silent tomb of a diner. I can't escape the sweetness, and I can't bear the bitterness that trails behind. The road stretches before me, empty and humming in the night. I taste enamel on my tongue and feel something inside me shift, a hollow click where my soul ought to be. I walk on toward the distant glow of another neon sign, because tomorrow night the hunger will come again, and the sugar bowl will wait. I walked into Millie's diner just past 10 o'clock on a Friday night, the heat of the highway still clinging to my skin, and the neon sign buzzing open in flickering ruby letters that felt like blood under thirsty moonlight. The linoleum cracked under my boots, and the air smelled of burnt coffee and grease clinging to the walls like a bad memory. The stools at the counter were half filled with regulars, old men in Stetsons hunched over chipped mugs, young couples whispering behind their hands, but every head turned as I stepped inside, as if I carried something with me, something they all sensed but couldn't name. I slid onto a stool at the far end, pressed my palms against the cool metal, and ordered the cherry pie, 2 slices, because even on the worst nights it calmed me. The sweet and tart bite of cherries wrapped in flaky dough. The waitress, her apron laced with flour and regret, nodded once and disappeared into the back, the door swinging shut behind her with a thud that echoed like a distant heartbeat. The radio behind the counter hummed an old country tune, though. Somehow it felt off, like the cries of unseen wings folded into the melody. I glanced out the window at the empty lot beyond the parking lights, everything half lit and half dead, and wondered again why I'd come back to this stretch of highway where tragedies had a habit of repeating themselves. When she returned, she carried the pie on a chip plate, steam rising in lazy spirals, and set it right in front of me. The filling gleamed like rubies trapped in amber, and for a moment I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, a shape curling like a fetus ready to break free. I reached for the knife, its blade dull with years of slicing, nothing more. Sinister than toast and jelly, but as soon as it pierced the crust, the sound cut through the diner like a gunshot. I froze, hand trembling. It wasn't the crust tearing, it was a high, keening wail, human and breaking. So close I felt it rattle my bones. Every eye in the diner snapped toward me, faces gone pale as the moon that spilled across the formica tables. The scream came again, longer this time, a raw, ragged keening that rose and dipped like a wounded animal's cry. The waitress leaned in, her eyes wide and wet, and whispered, "Don't eat it." But the crystal bite of the blade trembled in my fingers. The scream swallowed the music, drowned the hum of the neon, and I glanced at the other patrons. Hank, the man who claimed he'd witnessed a car roll off the cliff on Highway 46. Ruby, whose husband disappeared near the old fish hatchery. And the kid in the corner, eyes glued to his phone as if he could text away what was happening. They all stayed frozen, lips parted, as though the pie had become a doorway and something was clawing to get out. I lifted the slice, the moment stretched taut as a wire about to snap. The filling trembled beneath the crust, and every seed seemed to pulse with a distant heartbeat. Then the scream came again, louder than before, nearly shattering the windows, and I dropped the slice onto the plate. The crumbs rattled like tiny bones. Silence crashed down like a tidal wave, heavy and suffocating. Then the lights flickered, the neon sputtered, and the radio clicked off mid-note. And the scream started again, this time from below the floorboards. A chorus of agonies rising up as though the diner sat atop some buried graveyard of sorrows. People bolted from their seats, chairs scraping against the floor in a frantic stampede. I heard glass shatter in the kitchen as the waitress screamed and turned to run, but something made me stay, my heart pounding in my throat where I sat. Riveted by a dreadful curiosity, the scream swallowed everything, and I felt the air grow thick, the walls sagging inward, the ceiling weeping condensation as if it too mourned what lay beneath. My ears rang, but I could make out a pattern. A fractured melody of voices, women crying, children screaming, something hissing in a tongue that twisted the tongue to speak. I pressed both hands to the countertop, nails digging into the metal, and I watched in horror as the pie plate began to shake, the slice quivering as if alive. The crust split again, and this time blood seeped from the fissure thick, dark, pooling on the plate and dripping onto the counter like molten sorrow. The heat rose from that blood, as if it burned with a life of its own, and I smelled something I couldn't name, something awful and ancient, like the stink of cemeteries left to rot beneath the sun. Then the lights went out completely, and the diner fell into pitch darkness, broken only by the pulsing glow of the neon open sign outside, now flickering open as if someone had stolen a letter. In that blackness, the scream rose to a fever pitch, driving the men and women into screaming flight, smashing through doors and windows, their shadows peeling off the walls like living nightmares. I sat there, paralyzed, as footsteps thundered. Overhead, as if something had climbed onto the roof and was running back and forth, shaking the rafters. Something wet and warm touched my ankle, and I yanked my leg away, only to reveal a cherry seed rolling across the floor, cracking open and releasing a soft, mournful cry. I realized then that the diner wasn't my sanctuary but a trap, and that the scream didn't belong to me or to the slice of pie. It belonged to whatever had been buried beneath this place. Calling for release, I felt a presence beside me, cold as a grave, and I looked up into the waitress's face. Her eyes were empty hollows, and she pointed to the back wall, her lips moving in a silent plea. I followed her finger to a section of the paneling that seemed to shimmer, and as I stood, trembling, the panel bowed inward like a wounded beast, revealing a gaping maw in the earth. Roots curled from the edges, black and slick, and within that pit lay fragments of bones, sun-bleached and broken, tangled with rusted toys and tattered clothes. The scream poured from that hole, a river of anguish threatening to drown me. My mind screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted, and I found myself lifting the plate again, lifting that cursed slice as if drawn by some magnetic horror. I forced myself to lean in close to listen to the final shudder of its scream. And then it went silent, the world holding its breath. I raised the knife one last time and, with hands shaking, pressed it through the pie. The crust split with a gentle sigh, and inside I found a face eyes wide with terror, mouth open in. A silent scream, frozen forever in that last moment of agony. The blood seeped out in rivulets, and I felt the world tilt. I dropped the plate, turned, and ran, bursting through the back door into the alley, the neon sign behind me flickering its final letters, O-N. The scream followed me into the night, echoing off the pavement, chasing me toward the highway where the asphalt shimmered in the moonlight like a promise of escape. But no matter how far I ran, the scream never faded, and I knew that night. In Millie's diner, something ancient had awakened, and as long as the last slice remained uneaten, its wail would never die.